Hello everyone, and welcome to my advanced Ruby Rose guide for RWBY Grimm Eclipse. My name is Kinru, and for a bit of backstory, I am the current RWBY any percent world record holder, as well as having a few other world records in the game under my belt. I noticed there were very few resources out there for people looking to actually speedrun the game, or just to get better at playing it, without having to spend hours and hours studying how other people play, or investing thousands of hours into the game in order to improve. So I'm hoping to start a new series where I make an advanced guide for each character, as well as category guides, so for playing any percent in order to perform the skips, etc, etc. So even though this is an advanced guide, I'm actually going to be covering some basic principles as well, and this is just so people who are totally fresh to the game, who actually want to get into the deeper stuff, have something to build from, and then they can work up to the advanced things, rather than just everything being a massive whirlpool of information that's going to go right over their heads. So if you feel like a section is a bit too basic for you for an advanced guide, feel free to skip over that section. My aim is just to keep this guide easily accessible to people of all different skill levels. So with that all said and done, let's get right into the guide, and I hope you enjoy. Now, before we get into anything, the first bit of tech we're going to have to learn is something known as counter-cancelling. Counter-cancelling is basically an unintended mechanic in the game, where after using an ability which makes you airborne, or an aerial attack, you're able to press the counter button in order to drop to the ground faster, although this was left in the game after being discovered rather than being removed. I'll show a demo on the screen with and without counter cancels, and then at the end I'll show a side by side so you can see what it looks like. For advanced play in the game, we basically use this for both movement and for combat. It also has the benefit where, compared to playing the game normally, you actually have some flow in combat. If you've played this game before, you probably know that after using your combos, there's like a slight stutter or a pause before you can actually do anything else or perform any other action. So it kind of makes the gameplay feel a bit static, a bit, kind of rigid. So by incorporating counter cancels into your gameplay, it actually removes that stutter, and you're able to chain things together and create some kind of flow in your gameplay, providing it was an ability which made you airborne. Now, as I previously mentioned, this is used for both movement and for combat, so we're going to cover both things today, and we're going to start with movement. So what I've done here is open up the GVK command called track speed, where you can show the average speed in the top right corner of the game. What we're going to be looking at first is something known as bunnyhopping. So basically there's quite a few bits of movement in the game, some of which you'll be familiar with. The main, I suppose, would be dashing / sprinting, where you press the dodge button and keep it held down to run forward. And as you can see, my average speed at the top is about 14 or so. The most common way for casual players to move would be jump dashing, where you basically just jump and dash over and over again. Jump dashing is the fastest way you should be able to move, but by adding counter cancels in there, we're basically able to make them more effective. This is because when you jump dash normally, you still have to wait for that little bit of time after you gain the benefit from the jump dash to land back on the floor. But by using an attack after the jump dash has been executed, it allows us to then press the counter button to drop down quicker than usual. An attack of some kind needs to be inserted, or else pressing the counter button won't drop you back down to the ground. So with this in mind, we're basically going to be pressing jump, dash, attack, and then pressing the counter button. Doing this will allow you to gain the momentum of the jump dash, but then it also allows you to fall back down to the ground quickly, so you can chain the bunny hop right into another one to gain the most momentum possible. I'm now going to show you a clip of what bunny hopping looks like and how it's performed, so you can get a better understanding of how to do them, and then we'll go over some tips and tricks afterwards. As you can see, the average speed in this instance, compared to jump dashing by itself, was hovering around the 22 to 24 mark, making it faster than jump dashing on its own. Now you don't need to do it as fast as shown here in order to achieve that kind of momentum. You can get good speed with slow bunny hops, just so long as you're initiating another one the instant you land in order to chain them together. If you'd like my advice, I would recommend doing it in the starting area of chapter 10 or 9. 9 is slightly better, I would argue, because you have a bit more of a runway, but it's got flat terrain so you can practice counter-cancelling and have you landing being consistent, whereas other maps, all the terrain's like hilly and slopey, and it's going to mess up your pattern a little bit. And now for some tips and tricks regarding bunny hops. In order to help you practice them, I would recommend two things. Firstly, instead of looking at your character on the screen as you perform them, instead look down to your control method of choice, be that mouse and keyboard or controller. There are 4 buttons you need to press in order to perform bunny hops, which again are jump, dash, attack and counter. Knowing this as you look down at your control method of choice, look at the buttons you need to press and ignore every other button. Take those 4 buttons and label them 1 through 4 in the order you need to press them. Now press them in that order as you count them, either in your head or out loud. Repeating this method will help cement it in your head a bit easier than going alone, at least in my experience. The second tip, though this is less of a tip and more of a reminder I suppose, would be to just practice, practice, practice. The reason I say this is because while some people are able to pick up the technique easier right off the bat compared to others, it's still going to be something that you're new at, and is going to require some muscle memory to start getting right at a consistent level. I've taught this technique to people in game before, and after like 2 minutes of attempting them, they'll just say, "I can't do it," and then they give up. If you were to apply that same logic to something like working out, and you were saying you couldn't lift those big heavy weights from day one, like the other big guys are doing all around you, and you figure, "Oh, I'm no good at this," and then quit before you even had a chance to start developing your physique, then you would end up getting nowhere. Even if you start on the smaller weights, you just have to remember that that's still progress. So just keep at it, and you'll get it down in no time. It is worth mentioning that there are diminishing returns when it comes to bunny hopping. So long as the pattern is consistent, you are able to bunny hop rapidly and still gain the same speed. However, if you start going too fast, there is no real gap for the dash part of the bunny hop to do its thing, and you'll gain no momentum. I'll insert a quick clip of me doing excessively fast bunny hops here so you can see what I mean. As you can see, I was gaining barely any momentum at all, and it was only about as fast as sprinting. So don't worry about trying to do them as fast as humanly possible. Just aim to get the pattern consistent, and you can always incorporate a spam playstyle later on without hitting those diminishing returns. Now we're going to go over which attack to use for bunny hopping before moving on. So you may have noticed when describing bunny hops, I said jump, dash, attack and counter, without specifying which attack you should be using, be that heavy attack or whatever. This is because there are some slight differences regarding which attack you use. In regards to light and heavy attacks, it's been known that light attacks will gain you slightly more momentum than heavy attacks in regards to RWBY. But the difference is so marginal it's at the point of being insignificant. So between those two, it's more so a case on what you're more comfortable with. For me, personally, I prefer heavy attacks. When it comes to ranged attacks, however, there is a really important thing to note. You can bunny hop with ranged attacks, but there is one major obstacle making this less viable than the other two, and they're called breakables, i.e. pots and crates. In this game, there's an auto-targeting system in place in order to make fighting Grimm a bit, quote-unquote, easier. The Grimm will have a hitbox that your character will want to gravitate towards when you're fighting. But here's the kicker. The pots and crates you can smash along the way in missions have the same hitbox as the Grimm do. Meaning that when you're fighting and you try to shoot something, your character will sometimes want to shoot at that crate that's across the map around a wall rather than the Grimm that's 4 yards in front of you. This is important in bunny hopping, since these pots and crates are often to the side of pathways or all cluttered together, meaning that if you wanted to just bunny hop down the pathway to the next zone, and you're using ranged attacks, because it has a longer range than your melee attacks, it's going to want to auto-lock onto these pots and crates rather than directly ahead and instead pull you to the side. I'll insert a clip here of what I mean. You may be wondering if that little pull towards the pots could be seen as extra momentum, if a pot were theoretically across the map and it would tug you towards it for more speed gain, for speedrunning primarily. But honestly, you'd be much better off just keeping to your regular light or heavy bunny hops, rather than swapping to ranged and then back again. All of this should now give you an understanding of how to bunny hop in Grimm Eclipse. However, there is one more thing we need to cover in this section before moving on.
Ooh, neat!
Now, whilst bunny hops are the standard way for speedrunners to move about, there is actually a more advanced version of bunny hopping you can do. They have no official term for what they're called, so we're going to coin them as dash bunny hops. When you jump forward in this game, you'll obviously gain a bit of height and distance. However, if you hold down the dash button before jumping, it will increase both the height and distance of that jump. Knowing this, we can incorporate this extra layer into our bunny hops in order to further enhance them for more speed. To do this, you will hold down dash and then jump, let go of dash and press it, keep it held down as you press it ready for the next dash bunny hop, then press attack and counter. Now when you go to repeat the dash bunny hops, the dash button is already held down ready to perform it. I'll show a quick demo of what dash bunny hops look like, as well as their average speed, so you can see the difference compared to regular bunny hops. As you can see, the average speed this time was ranging from between 24 to 28, putting it at the top end of regular bunny hop average speed at the minimum, and also increasing it by a further 4 at the top end. Having said this, 28 average speed is not the optimal average for dash bunny hops. When done optimally with no mistakes, you can get from between 30 to 31, though hitting this range is pretty hard, not to mention keeping it consistent. I think in my entire time playing I've only ever hit 31 twice, but given that it's over double the speed of just sprinting, it gives you an indication of how fast you'll be moving. Despite this being incredibly quick, there is actually one more piece of move tech you can incorporate, which is faster than dash bunny hops, which is exclusive to RWBY in this case, even though some other characters do have their own bits of advanced move tech. It is circumstantial, however, but it's the fastest way RWBY can move. I'll now show a clip demonstrating this technique and break it down for you so you can see how it's done. So the technique we're going to cover are known as ledge pulls. Ledge pulls can be performed on RWBY when you're at you guessed it, a ledge. When you're at the edge of somewhere in the game, you're able to press the dash, light and counter buttons in rapid succession in order to pull yourself down from that ledge at high speed. And when I say rapid succession, I mean it has to be rapid. You can't do it in the span of 2 seconds or something like that, or else it won't work. Again, you can label the buttons on your controller of choice to know which you need to press and in what order, and practice on any ledge of your choosing. Keep in mind that some ledges in this game have an invisible segment on the end of them, past where you can visibly see by the textures. So if you're having trouble on a certain ledge, it could be that this is a possibility, though thankfully they are few and far between. I'll now show ledge pulls in action and an on-screen prompt of how you can do them. At the end there, I displayed what ledge pulls can do if done whilst moving. If you perform ledge pulls whilst moving forward, you'll gain more speed than just standing still and doing them. Though for practice, it would be better to just stand stationary at the ledge. In speedrunning, this does save a bit of time if you're able to transition from bunny hopping over to ledge pulls fast enough, but you'll also have to see if you're going to overshoot the ledge or not in the given moment. As you could see though, the average speed was ranging from between 37 when done whilst stationary, and up to 41 when done whilst moving. This is almost double the speed of regular bunny hopping, though again, it's circumstantial and is short-lived. We're now going to cover one final thing about movement before moving on to the next section. Now, as funny as it sounds, your camera angle actually does have an effect on your movement speed. If you were to hold your camera behind your character at a neutral angle, that's being directly behind them parallel to the floor, your character will move faster than at any other angle. I'll show a quick demonstration clip of me just sprinting and moving the camera until we hit the sweet spot, that being a perfect flat 15 average speed. The further you move away from this neutral point, the slower your character will go. Since there's a floor under you, you won't be able to move your character too far in that direction, but if you were to move it above your character, in a bird's eye view kind of a way, your average speed while sprinting will drop down to about 10 or so. Funnily enough though, there is actually an exception to this. If you're to move your character sideways, with no forward or backwards movements being inputted at all, it will actually nullify the camera angle restriction, and you'll be able to move at top speed regardless of where you position your camera. Why this is actually a thing, I don't know, but welcome to Grimm Eclipse. This means though that in areas where you only need to move straight ahead, or if you know where you're going without needing to see directly in front of you, you can simply move sideways and not worry about the camera's position, as you always maintain top speed whilst moving. This is primarily useful for speedrunning, if you're wanting to squeeze every last drop you can out of time saves. And with that, I think that's about all that can be covered in regards to movement with RWBY in Grimm Eclipse. Keep in mind that everything besides the ledge pulls, so bunny hopping, camera angle, dash bunny hopping, is applicable to every character in the game. The only exception would be using Ren's heavy attack for bunny hopping, as it eats his movement, so light attacks for him and bunny hopping are needed instead. We're now going to go over talent builds briefly, before moving on how to fight with RWBY in general terms, before then moving on to kill strategies for each Grimm.
We did it!
Okay, so now we're going to look at talent build choices for RWBY. What I'm going to do is first show a few multiplayer builds that you can use in online lobbies, and then I'll show you a few build paths which are more focused on single player, primarily for speedrunning. Now, even though I'm going to be showing a few different build types, it would be best to consider them as one of two groups. The first group would be with upgraded ult, and the second group would be with unupgraded ult. Whichever group a spec falls into, their playstyle is going to be relatively similar, except for one or two differences depending on which talents were picked, but I'll explain those as they come about. So to make this easier, I'll show the group 1 builds first, so the specs which have ult upgraded. Please keep in mind that the primary focus of this guide is going to be with the builds which have the ult fully upgraded, as they tend to be the most popular ways to play RWBY, but the group 2 builds without ult upgraded will still be covered, just in a bit less detail. Okay, so let's get into the builds. The first spec here is the one I tend to opt for in multiplayer myself. It utilises max ult upgrade, with an emphasis on using them frequently within groups, or for more frequent use on individual kill strategies, which will be covered a bit later on. It's very similar to a speedrun build, except you opt for medic over one of the other choices. The second build is similar, but instead of getting hyper ballistic for lower hit streak required for ult gain, you get heavy synergy and some extra survivability with the improved aura talent. The main focus on this spec is when you know there's going to be masses of enemies about, so getting the reduced hit streak for ult isn't that necessary, since you'll be building ult extremely quickly by using your triple light and heavy attack within groups. So rather than overcapping ult, we're going to be making the triple light heavies more effective by increasing the chances we team attack stun Grimm with the heavy portion of the attack, and likely just killing them instantly with it. And since there's more Grimm around, we add that little bit of an extra safety belt by increasing our aura bar. So think of this spec as more of a balance between ult use and triple light heavies. The third spec is pretty similar to the others, though you're basically going to be dropping out one of your ult bars in favour of making your triple light heavies more effective. This is also a good balance between ults and your regular attacks, with the hyper ballistic talent refilling your ult gauges effectively, even though you now have one fewer than before. I think it's actually worth mentioning here as well that if you ever choose to upgrade your ultimate on any character, not just for RWBY, that you invest in getting at least one ult upgrade. This is because with only one bar, once you cap it out and you can use ultimate, any hits you do against enemies are now wasted since you can't fill up your ult gauge anymore. So it basically forces to use your ults in less than ideal situations, or to keep wasting ult meter when you can't fill up your bar anymore. It basically means that with only one bar that you can either use ult or you can't, whereas if you have two or more ult gauges, you can overshoot that first ult bar and save the ult for when it's needed, since you're still going to be gaining meter. It just gives you so many more options by being able to work for another ultimate while still having one ready, rather than filling up your single ult bar, having to use it, and then starting all the way back down at 0 meter again, since you couldn't overshoot it when it filled up. So with a single ult bar, you basically either have no ult, which is basically like not having an attack at all, or just one, and then it has to be started from scratch all over again once used. So yeah, if you invest into upgraded ults, just make sure you pick at least one talent that gives you more ult bars to play with. The fourth spec is focused more on fighting up close and personal with the Grimm. Though you can do the same with the other specs, this is just going to give you more of a safety net whilst playing as such. Despite it being very good for fighting up close, you can also fight passively with this spec too, and just have the survival talents act as a safety net to keep you up and alive, rather than using them to adopt a close quarters playstyle. You still invest into upgrading how many ults you have, since RWBY's rank 1 ult has a quick cast time and still does some good damage. So while fighting up close to the Grimm, you can insert these for some extra damage. You can also use your ults to avoid attacks coming towards you rather than dodging or countering due to the invincibility frames, all the while still getting some damage off in the process. You may wonder why we don't also pick the talent which increases how fast your aura regens. Whilst it's not inherently bad as a talent as such, it's the most expensive defensive talent at 2 points, while all the other defensive options cost just 1, and it's the one that also gives you the least bang for your buck out of all of them. The reason being that even though regenning your aura faster is always welcome, it doesn't directly increase your survivability from attacks like the other talents do. While I wouldn't say it's a bad talent per se, there are just better options to pick in the talent tree that are going to contribute more to your overall gameplay than regenning your aura 2 seconds faster. If you absolutely had to pick up this talent though, my suggestion would be to drop the improved counter talent and either an ultimate meter or the range perk in order to pick it up. Okay, so now we're going to go over speedrun talent build choices for RWBY. Currently, there are only 2 main specs which are played for RWBY, the first being the most played, and the second being less popular but still viable for running, and has even been argued as better than the most played build. The first speedrun build is the most popular build for RWBY, and is the one I play myself. It utilises the heavy damage from your ultimate to maximise damage output, sacrificing survivability in the process. You may think that sacrificing survivability is a bad decision for you personally if you find yourself getting hit a lot, but don't worry, we'll be covering minimising taking damage a bit later on in the guide. The ultimate upgrade we take is the one which hits Grimm back, as it deals more damage than the upgrade next to it. The other upgrade pulls things towards you, which makes killing Beowolves a bit easier, but it makes it a lot worse versus everything else in the game. If you have the Beowolves positioned correctly though, the upgrade we have here will one-shot them anyway, so it still becomes the superior choice. If I'm being totally honest here though, despite investing into the ranged upgrade, I find myself barely ever using it in regards to speedrunning, but in general play it does have its uses. If you're one like me that finds yourself barely using this upgrade, you may find better use investing it into the survivability perk to give yourself that bit of an extra safety net if you were to make a mistake. The second talent tree instead focuses on RWBY's combos, and not so much on her ult, though we still get 3 ult usages with her rank 1. Reason being, it still does good damage and is a very quick cast time compared to higher rank ults, so they're generally used as finishers when the situation fits. The main focus on this spec, besides her regular combos, is utilising her ranged combo and team attack, which devastates any Grimm or Android out there with a very beginner-friendly combo, but we'll get into all of that a little bit later on in the Grimm kill strategy section. So that was a quick overview on the talent build choices for RWBY. Now we're going to go over RWBY's attacks and how to fight with her.
We did it!
So in regards to combat, there's a few things to mention. I'm not going to go over every single ability here since some are barely used, so I'm only going to cover the important ones. Though do keep in mind that if an ability isn't mentioned here, it doesn't mean to say that it won't be used in the kill strategy section. Remember, this part is all about general combat and what is good and what is bad in that department. So if you see I've omitted something in this section, it's safe to assume the attack isn't optimal for general advanced play. A lot earlier in this guide I mentioned how we used counter cancels for both movement and for combat. You're able to counter cancel any ability which makes your character airborne, the only exceptions being team attacks and ultimates. Looking at RWBY's combos, we can actually see that at the end of her triple light and heavy attack, she does a little backflip. If you wanted to keep attacking after this, with light attacks for example, RWBY will start using her airborne light attack combo, which is bad. Even her aerial heavy isn't optimal either. So what you can do, if you time it right, you can press the counter button after the heavy portion of the triple light heavy combo goes off, in order to animation cancel the backflip and ground her instantly. Now if you wanted to start using light attacks, RWBY will now start using her grounded light attack string instead of her aerial one, meaning that you can start instantly chaining that triple light and heavy attack right into another one. As well as animation cancelling RWBY's combos and aerial heavies, we're also able to counter cancel her ranged attack. In this game, optimal shooting with a ranged combo consists of jumping into the air, using the combo, then pressing the counter button to drop to the ground faster before jumping up to do the ranged combo again. With RWBY though, her ranged combo makes her airborne anyway, even if momentarily, even if she does it from a standing position, meaning that you can press the counter button after a grounded range combo to counter cancel the last bullet after she shoots it off. This is useful to know if you plan on using her range combo in your gameplay. Keep in mind that the counter button needs to be pressed as the attack animation has gone off, and needs to be pressed quickly within that time. If you're too slow, you'll likely instead have already landed and then be pressing the counter button, meaning that you'll counter on the ground instead. Grimm in this game are programmed to attack you if you counter nothing, so if you get the timing wrong, it's likely you're just going to get hit, which may even lead to a death if you get chained out by attacks, since invincibility frames do not exist in this game when you take damage. But we don't always have to use her full range combo for counter cancels. We're also able to counter-cancel single bullet shots in this game. This can be useful for finishing off low health enemies which are away from you, that don't warrant you moving all the way towards for the sake of a few single hits. Doing single counter-cancel bullet shots in this game is known as tap shooting, and when done at higher speeds, it makes for a good option in certain situations. A good example would be during wave encounters where you face mutated creeps, since they only take 3 bullet shots to kill, and you'll also not be using melee attacks and risk taking damage from their death explosion. It also just has the perk of you not having to move. I'll show a couple of examples of tap shooting now. The first being me doing a slowed down version, so you can grasp how tap shooting is performed, then a clip of how effective fast tap shooting can be when performed at higher speeds. If you would like a tip to help you with tap shooting, you can actually use 2 hands to do the inputs, so long as you're at a safe position where you can be stationary and not going to be hit by any Grimm. If you bring your hand over from your mouse over to your keyboard, or from the left side of your controller to the right side where the buttons are, you can 2-hand the inputs and alternate the button presses between each hand, as if you were drumming on a table, for example. I think it'd be safe to say that tapping on a table with your left hand, then your right hand, then your left hand, then your right hand, etc. is pretty easy for everyone to do. Use that same principle and apply it to tap shooting. So you can assign 2 fingers for 2 of the buttons, and then the other hand for the other button. My advice on this would be to assign the jump and shoot buttons for one hand, while the other hand does the counter button. Bear in mind also that this game does allow double inputs, meaning that if you're to press the jump and shoot button down at the same time, within the same frame, your character will do both of those actions at once, meaning it technically becomes an alternation of 2 button presses between your hands, though 2 buttons are being pressed at the same time with one of those hands. Double inputting also has the added benefit where you're performing an action the instant after jumping, which will make it so that you didn't gain much height from your jump. This will make it so that you're lower on the ground for when you press the counter button and have less travel time to the ground in order to perform the action again. It is worth noting that in order to perform the higher speed tap shooting, good FPS is recommended. That's frames per second. In this game, the higher your FPS, the faster your abilities will come out, due to the animations coming out quicker. However, if you don't have a decent computer or laptop to reach these higher FPS values, don't feel disheartened, as you can still tap shoot at some crazy high speeds anyway. Your timing will just need to be a little bit more precise. So if you play this game on console, and hence your FPS is capped at 60 inherently, tap shooting is still perfectly viable. Now we're going to look at one final ability here before moving on, and that's RWBY's Charged Heavy Attack. RWBY's Charged Heavy Attack is also a useful move that you'll be using in general combat, though perhaps not in the way you may think. When an enemy is stunned in this game, they'll have a little icon above their head that you can see here. Despite them being stunned, Grimm in this state are not completely vulnerable whilst in this stun. While it's true that their guard is now down, they'll have what is known as a revenge strike, where after they take a certain number of hits whilst in this stun, they'll automatically break free and go to swing for you. This swing cannot be countered. There are a couple of exceptions to this rule. The first being if you hit the Grimm at range, like with tap shooting for example. If you hit a stunned Grimm with constant ranged attacks at a distance, it will not break the stun. The only Grimm this doesn't work on are both the Ursa and Ursa Major, both of which will break out of the stun after a set number of hits, regardless of what attack or distance is being implemented. The other exception are against alpha creeps, which will dig and tunnel away from you once their revenge strike has been reached, rather than attacking back. This dig and tunnel cannot be interrupted unless you kill the alpha creep before it can dig itself underground and go away from you. The number of swings varies between each Grimm as well. I'll show on screen what numbers for each Grimm's own revenge strike is. Bear in mind that some of your attacks, while only being one button press, do hit multiple times. So for example, RWBY's triple light attack is going to hit a total of 5 times, and the heavy portion is going to hit for an extra 3 if you were to follow it up. That's 8 hits against an enemy's revenge strike, so it's likely going to overshoot their revenge strike threshold. So what does all of this have to do with RWBY's charged heavy attack? Well, Grimm in this stunned state are somewhat vulnerable, sure, and in some cases can be finished off whilst in that state before their revenge strike becomes an issue. But 9 times out of 10, what you're actually going to want to do versus Big Grimm, that's any Grimm that's above Beowolf, is you're going to want to use your charged heavy attack on Grimm that are stunned. This will actually 100% guarantee that you proc a team attack on that Grimm. Team attacks are like the ultimate stun in this game. It breaks their guard, has no revenge strike stigma to worry about, and lasts for an absurd amount of time, much longer than the regular stun does. A note here is that any of your regular heavy attacks have a chance to proc a team attack on a Grimm, including when you counter them. This is providing that the Grimm was around a third of its HP or less. This is so that you just can't instantly team attack stun an Ursa or Alpha Beowolf, for example, when they spawn in, and making them an uninteractive fight by team attack stunning them right off the bat. Regular Beowolves are unaffected by this HP restriction, and can be procced with a team attack at any HP threshold, given that their HP is at the lower end, and they're still considered lower tier Grimm, just above creeps. If a higher tier Grimm becomes stunned by any means, be that your ranged ability or countering them, you can charged heavy to guarantee a team attack stun, regardless of the HP threshold. One of the most common mistakes I see with newer players, or even more experienced players of the game, is that versus a Grimm that's been team attack stunned, they'll go to trigger the team attack the instant they see the icon. This is just going to break the stun on the Grimm and then allow it to bring its guard back up, when instead you could have just been hitting it with your attacks until you finish it off. The team attack stun will only finish under 2 circumstances. Either someone executes the team attack, or the timer for the team attack runs out. But the timer for it is so absurdly long, more than likely you're going to kill the Grimm before it even becomes an issue. The only time you'll want to actually trigger that team attack is if it's going to 100% finish the Grimm off. Another mistake I often see is when players are already planning to team attack a Grimm after using their charged heavy to set up the team attack, and there's like a gap between their charged heavy and the team attack itself. What you can do while RWBY is flying forward with her charged heavy animation is just spam the team attack button, meaning that when it connects and the stun turns into a team attack, RWBY is instantly going to execute the team attack the millisecond it's available. While this strategy is less common for specs which have ult fully upgraded, it becomes a mandatory piece of tech to use for specs where you have RWBY's team attack fully upgraded, since that's going to be a primary component of your gameplay. Do keep in mind, however, that you cannot execute your own team attacks in multiplayer. Another thing to note about RWBY's charged heavy, although this applies to every single charged heavy attack in the game, is that you do not actually need to charge it up for its full duration in order to get the charged up version of the heavy attack. I'll show a quick clip of me doing a full charged heavy, then me cutting it short while still getting its full charged up benefit, then a side by side so you can see the difference. It may not seem like much to some, but we were able to get a full extra charged heavy in the same time frame as just allowing the full duration of the attack to go through by itself. This technique is actually going to be necessary for one of the cool combos a bit later on in the guide, so it's definitely worth picking up. Despite this, RWBY's triple light and heavy attack is her bread and butter move, and the main ability you're going to be using anyway. It hits hard and it hits multiple Grimm at once. Her double light heavy attack is also a good attack that hits hard, but it only hits in a tiny cone in front of her, so in 9 out of 10 situations you're better off just investing that one extra light attack into your combo for the hard multi-hit That's going to do more overall than keeping to the double light heavy and likely just needing to triple light heavy after anyway. Something very important to know about doing combos on any character is that you're actually allowed to do other inputs between your combos, and so long as you don't leave too long of a gap, the whole combo will still go off. For example, if you were to use 2 light attacks, then a ranged attack, then press heavy, RWBY will still do her double light and heavy combo, despite an input being done between them. This applies to any combo. So how is this of use to us? Well, since your 3 light and heavy combo is your bread and butter, but it has the longest time to come out of any of her combos, it tends to leave you wide open. So what you'll want to do is add a dodge after the 3 light attacks before using your heavy, so that any Grimm that go to attack during your wind-up time will miss, but you'll still be able to get your heavy off. Adding a dash after each 3 light combo before the heavy should be used every single time you do it. But if in the given moment you see that the dodge is not required, you can input the heavy button any millisecond after the dodge button has been pressed, to make it so that no time was wasted, and the attack goes off fully as normal. Watching out for these circumstances is what's going to separate you from the rest, since it means that if you need the defensive utility of the dodge at the last second, you can allow it to go off without nullifying your attack. Inputting the dodge each time just leaves the option open. It also has the option of giving you increased range on the heavy portion of the attack, since you can dodge forward for some extra distance before using the heavy. Now you know all this, we can get into learning how to fight. For this, I'm going to split it into 2 parts. The first being a kill strategy for each Grimm in the game, of which there may be multiple methods to do so. Afterwards, I'm going to show you how to put everything together that we learned. So that's with the combat tech we learned here, and the kill strategies all being combined into one for general play. I'm sure this is a part some of you have been waiting to get to, so we'll now begin with kill strategies for each enemy in the game.
Take that!
The first enemy we're going to look at will be a regular creep. Do note that this section is more for individual kills on isolated targets, more so than in general play. There's a few ways you can go about killing these Grimm. Firstly, you can use a regular light-heavy combo to kill them. Simple as that. The light portion of the attack do not need to land, only the heavy portion needs to in order to secure the kill. You'll still want to land the light attacks anyway, if you can, as it's just more benefit to your ult gauge. The second method will be when you're bunny hopping towards a creep. When you get close enough, you'll want to actually allow the heavy portion of the aerial heavy to come out, and delaying your counter by a brief second, only once it's been struck by the heavy attack. You'll then counter-cancel that heavy into a dash heavy attack, which should all come out quite fast and finish the Grimm off. Do note that dash heavy does have quite a small range to it, meaning that if you knock the Grimm too far back with the heavy portion of your attack with the aerial heavy, or terrain is uneven, and then you go to dash heavy, it's quite likely the attack will miss. The third option will be the same as before, but instead of a dash heavy you'll be using an uncharged heavy instead. It has a slower recovery time than dash heavy, but its reach is much longer, meaning that in situations where your dash heavy will miss, the uncharged heavy will very likely hit the Grimm instead. The fourth and final option will be to use ranged bunny hops towards the target, given that there's no breakables around, and use an uncharged heavy once you reach it. You only need to land 3 bullets before your uncharged heavy in order to kill the creep. Next up are Beowolves. For the first method for these, you're going to want to use the same jump dash aerial heavy attack towards them like with creeps, counter-cancelled into a triple light heavy attack, with a counter-cancel for the backflip at the end. The second is just to simply triple light and heavy them, and seeing if you get a team attack proc since it's a heavy attack. If the Beowolf gets team attack proc during the heavy portion, the attack alone will kill it. If it doesn't, you just need to counter-cancel the backflip into a double light heavy attack to finish it off. The third way is used when you're already fighting something, and a Beowolf comes to swing for you, as you're in the down portion of one of your attacks. You'll counter its swing, then use a charged heavy and spam team attack. The team attack portion will finish pretty quickly, and it should all look pretty fluid. For groups of Beowolves, you'll be using your ultimate. Since this ultimate upgrade knocks things away from RWBY rather than pulling them in, it can be a bit harder to kill all the Beos at once. You can jump into the middle of a group of them and ult before they can step back too far in an attempt to circle you. If you collect Beowolves at spawn points, it can be handy to dash heavy one of them, preferably the last one you collect, towards the other Beowolves to make grouping them a bit easier for when you land your ultimate. If no ults are available, you can always group them up and triple light heavy them down instead. This can sometimes be a more effective strategy than using ultimate, depending on how lucky you get with team attack procs. Next up are alpha creeps. For these, there's a few methods you can choose from. The first will be to use a triple light heavy attack against it, then use a quick charged heavy to hit it while its guard is down. The leap forward RWBY does with her charged heavy as well helps close the gap you made from knocking it back. The second method will be similar, but instead of a charged heavy, you'll use an uncharged heavy. This can only be done in a few ways. The first is if the alpha creep's back is facing a wall of some kind, meaning that your 3 light heavy attack won't knock it back as far, so it's still in range to be hit by the uncharged heavy. The other way is if you choose to insert a bunny hop towards the target after counter-cancelling the backflip of the triple light heavy, and then using the uncharged heavy once you're close again. Do note that using a ranged bunny hop here and the bullet hitting will break the stun on the alpha creep, and will make it so that your following uncharged heavy will not land the kill. Something to note about RWBY's uncharged heavy is that it will sometimes miss with no real reason as to why. Your attack will simply just go through your target and deal no damage or knockback, even though it was a direct hit. Though this may be a few factors combined, I have actually figured out that if you input too many directional inputs whilst the charged heavy is in its animation, it will cause this bug to happen about 9 times out of 10, and consistently. So perhaps holding back on any directional inputs whilst doing the uncharged heavy would be your best bet. The next way will be to use a jump dash aerial heavy, like in the Creep and Beowolf section, but instead counter-cancelling it into an ultimate once the aerial heavy has landed. When you have 2 alpha creeps spawn in, as is the case for pretty much every instance of them spawning in solo player or normal mode, it would be best to try and knock them with your aerial heavy into each other, so that your following ultimate will hit both of them for the double kill. Alternatively, if you do not wish to use an ult on the alpha creeps, you can instead use a triple light heavy attack on one of them, jump over to the other one, and use a triple light heavy on that one, with it hitting the first one you attacked for the double kill. Next up are alpha Beowolves. This is actually one of the targets where you'll be paying most attention so you know how to react. When an alpha Beowolf spawns in, it will have a few seconds before it will attack, like any other Grimm, and during this time can be knocked back. However, we're now entering the territory where Grimms start to get uncancelable attack animations. This can be a good and bad thing. It can be good because it means that during this state, the Grimm's attack can't be interrupted from taking damage, meaning that once it has committed to an attack, it cannot be knocked back. This makes it a very good time to land an ultimate on the alpha Beowolf, so it takes the full damage without fear of knocking it out of range. It can be a bad thing because it means that it can catch you out sometimes. Say if you make a mistake and end up having to ult to knock back some Beowolves, but that alpha Beowolf was already committed to its attack and swings for you as you come out of the ult animation. But anyway, with alpha Beowolves, they will always do a backflip upon taking damage, if you hit them early after spawning before they make an attempt to attack. If you hit them as they're spawning in, and hit them with another attack after that first one, they will do a second backflip upon taking that damage. You're basically going to assess how quickly you engage on it to know which combo you're going to do. The first combo would assume a perfect world where you engage on it as it spawns in, which is pretty likely when you get to know spawn locations within the game. For this combo, you're going to use her triple light heavy attack, quickly counter-cancelling the backflip into a jump dash aerial heavy to make it so that the aerial heavy knocks it back a second time, counter-cancelling the aerial heavy into another triple light heavy while it's recovering, counter-cancelling the backflip of the triple light heavy into an ultimate for the kill. The second combo is similar, but happens when you engage on the alpha Beowolf the very instant it spawns in. When you go for your second triple light heavy, it will re-stand the alpha beowolf and cause it to go for a swing earlier than usual. When this happens, you'll instead counter the beowolf's swing when you go to counter-cancel the backflip of your triple light heavy attack. This method is a little bit slower, since you need to actually do the counter animation for the alpha beowolf's swing, rather than counter-cancelling into an ultimate before the counter indicator appears. But because this combo starts a little bit earlier than the other method, it kind of balances out, so there's not really much difference. The third combo is when you get to the alpha beowolf too late, and your first triple light heavy doesn't cause a knockback, and instead the alpha beowolf blocks before going into a swing of its own for you. When this happens, you will counter the attack and go to use another triple light heavy. Even though we learned earlier that this will overshoot the revenge strike threshold, its counter attack doesn't actually matter, since we're going to counter cancel the triple light heavy into an ultimate for the kill. And since its revenge strike can't be countered, it doesn't interrupt us doing this combo. Another method, if you did not wish to include an ult, is to use a triple light heavy attack against it at any point before it goes to attack. You can then counter the attack when it comes, quick charged heavy to set up a team attack stun, then use another triple light heavy attack for the kill. If you really wanted as well, you could use your range stun to set up the stun on the alpha beowolf, use the charged heavy into a triple light heavy, counter cancelling the backflip into a team attack. However, I feel using range stun on RWBY for this main spec is less optimal than going for any other kill combo mentioned, but feel free to use what you wish. The final method would just be simply use 2 ults to kill it. This is mainly when it's the last enemy of a mission, like Chapter 1 for example, or if you know you'll be fine going to the next area with no ults, or just one. It's worth mentioning that despite your ult being able to be cast over the top of Grimm and still being able to hit them without being in their attack range, there is a limit to how high you can go over a Grimm and have the ult do its full damage. If you go too high, your ult will only clip the Grimm with part of the attack and do minimal damage. If you go even higher than that, the ult will miss altogether. Thankfully, there are not many instances in this game where this situation can occur, unless you purposefully try to elbow drop the Grimm from a high up vantage point. Next up are Boarbatusks, otherwise known as boars. For these, the first kill strategy consists of using a triple light heavy, preferably the instant they spawn in, then counter-cancelling the backflip of the triple light into a bunny hop towards the boar after your attack just knocked it back, counter-cancelling the bunny hop into an ultimate for the kill. You can use any bunny hop method towards the boar that you like, however, the ranged one seems to give a bit of a better tug towards them in this instance. So long as there's no breakables that are going to get in the way, this would be the best b-hop method of choice. The next method would be to stun it in any way, then use a quick charged heavy into a triple light heavy attack for the kill. You can either stun the boar with your triple ranged attack, or just counter it when it goes to attack. Countering when they go to attack can be useful when you're already fighting something else, and the boar uses its spin attack towards you from off screen, but you either hear or see it coming. You can counter the charge and do a quick kill on it with charged heavy and triple light heavy before continuing to go back whatever you were doing beforehand. The next method involves when you encounter 2 boars at once, which will occur in single player normal mode a few times over. For this, it's best to triple light heavy attack one of the boars into the direction of a nearby spawn location, then ulting the pair of boars at the same time, catching the one that's spawning in. The one that you attacked before will fall to the ult, leaving the second boar alone, where you can triple light heavy for the kill. If you do this fast enough, you can deal with the pair of boars before they even have a chance to attack. Whilst we're here, we may as well cover androids also. Androids have the same HP values that boars do, both red and white ones. This means that your kill strategies for androids are the same as boars. Triple light heavy, counter-cancel the backflip, range b-hop towards the android, counter-cancel the b-hop into an ult will always be the best way of dealing with them. The main secret to dealing with androids is to take them out as they're spawning in. They're one of the most annoying enemies to deal with in the game, especially the white ones. Killing them before they even have a chance to attack will always be the superior way of dealing with them. There is another way of dealing with the red androids in particular, which differs to boars slightly, and that's again when there's two of them. What you can do is range stun one as it's spawning in, then use a charged heavy. The android that spawns in second will be moving quickly towards you during this time. Once it gets in range, it will go to attack, which you will counter. You will then shift your focus to that second android and use a charged heavy on that one also, preferably into the direction of the first android you attacked, so they don't get spaced out too far. You will then use a triple light heavy combo to finish them both at once. Note that the red android will only go to use a counterable attack when it's at a certain distance away from you. If you get too close to it, it will instead use an uncounterable attack on you, which will be indicated by the red marker above its head. White androids are different in that they have no counterable attack, so your only way of stunning them would be use your ranged combo on them, with the chain effect hitting both. If it does, go in quick charged heavy each one, then triple light heavy for the double kill. If you would like a final easy peasy type combo to deal with androids and boars, you can use range stun, and then 2 quick charged heavies to finish them off. Later I'll be covering how to fight androids and everything else in general terms by putting everything we learned here and beforehand together, so don't fret if you're thinking about the times androids spawn in like maniacs when you're already dealing with other things. It will be covered a bit later. It is worth mentioning for now though that if you see any white androids spawn in during an encounter, they will take priority over everything else in that fight. Quick kill comboing them with any of the above combos, though preferably with the triple light heavy bhop ult combo, will be your main focus when you notice them. Else, you'll likely get hit by off-screen grenades and get chained out by attacks. Next up are Ursas. You have 2 options for these. The first would be if you waited for their rock attack that stuns them, where you can then charge heavy and use your attacks to finish it off. The second method is if you do not wish to wait and you want to kill it as fast as possible, preferably done on the last Ursa you're going to face. You'll need 2 triple light heavy attacks and 2 ults to kill an Ursa. The order in which you do these attacks do not matter, though you could argue that ulting in as soon as it spawns in, then triple light heavying twice with them being cancelled into each other, and counter cancelling the second one into an ult would be the optimal method. There isn't really much else to say about Ursa, since it's either waiting for a random attack or killing them with triple light heavies and ults. Relying on damage outside of RWBY's ultimate when they haven't used a rock attack is going to be a slow and grueling process, no matter how you go about it. Now for the Ursa Major. This fight is interesting since it's one of the 3 big Grimm in the game, which cannot be team attack stunned after using your charged heavy on it. The only other ones being the Mutated Deathstalker and Mutated Beowolf. It's also interesting given that the Ursa Major has the highest revenge strike threshold in the game, that being 12 hits. When it's stunned, it can take 12 individual hits before it breaks its stunned state, but keep in mind that if you leave too much of a gap between your attacks, the Ursa Major will break free from its stun, regardless of how many hits you had done beforehand. For this fight, you're basically going to be waiting until the Ursa Major does its rock attack, and just spam triple light heavy on it meanwhile. When it does this rock attack, you have a few options. Even though there is one which is optimal above the rest, the other methods are interesting enough that I felt I should list them anyway, should you wish to try them for yourself. The damage on these combos are still very good. The first method would be to wait for the rock attack, then use RWBY's double light heavy. The reason for this is that it has fewer hits compared to her triple light and still hits very hard. The heavy portion of her double light hits twice, and the wind up attack hits twice, hitting for a total of 4 times. Comparing this to her triple light heavy, hitting a total of 8 times, meaning that you wouldn't even be able to use 2 triple light heavies during that stun. However, we can go one step further with this. Considering her light attacks are very weak, you don't overly want them to be hitting the Ursa Major and eating into that 12 hit limit. But if you try and make it so only the heavy portion of her double light heavy hits, the stun on the Ursa Major is going to break, since there's too much of a gap between attacks. To counter this, you're going to hit the Ursa Major with only one of those light attacks. Then turn RWBY round the other way as you do the second light attack so it misses. Then quickly turn back and hit it with the heavy portion of the attack, for a total of 3 hits now instead of 4. Considering it can take a total of 12 hits before the stun breaks, this is going to give you a whole extra combo to use on it while it's in this stun. There's just enough time for the heavy of it to hit it while it's stunned, and you're using the second light attack away from it before it shakes the stun off, but it must all be done rather quickly. After the combo hits the 12 hit limit, you will see the Ursa Major curl up ready to shoot out a shockwave. During this time you can use an ultimate instead of backing away, so you can damage it and take advantage of the invincibility frames of the ult. The second method is similar to the first, but does a bit more overall damage. You'll begin by waiting for its rock attack as usual, and then use a quick charged heavy. You'll then use her dash light attack to catch up to its knockback, then follow that up with an uncharged heavy. You'll then go into her double light heavy combo we learned just now, of facing the second attack of the double light away from it before using heavy. The dash light portion of this combo will hit for minimal damage, but it's used for its utility of catching up. But you're going to get an extra charged heavy and uncharged heavy to hit the Ursa Major compared to the previous combo, dealing more damage overall. You'll still want to ultimate during its shockwave animation like before. The third option is the most optimal method. After its rock attack, you'll want to use her triple light heavy, aiming the light attacks away from it. You'll then turn the attack back round to it, hitting it with the heavy portion. You'll then counter-cancel the backflip of the triple light heavy into an uncharged heavy. You'll then go into dash light and uncharged heavy spam 4 times over, until it does its shockwave wind-up animation, where you'll then ult as normal. You can kill the Ursa Major in 2 cycles of its stun using this method. You can be pretty creative with how you go about it though, to be honest. So long as you're obeying the 12 hits limit, and trying to get as many hard-hitting abilities as you can. In multiplayer, you'll find you're able to use some combos you're usually not allowed to, given that your teammates will be keeping it stunned with attacks while you're getting the next attack ready. It's worth mentioning quickly as well that lag in online multiplayer can also allow you to overshoot the threshold, so long as you're not the one hosting. Given that the game is still processing your hits, but is still getting hit all at the same time, before it registers that the limit has been reached. This can cause some very quick kills on the Ursa Major, so long as people know how to go about it. And now for the Mutated Grimm. For Mutated Creeps, you can use Aerial Heavy, then dodge away from its death explosion. You can also use 3 tap shoots to deal with them, which is handy when you're in a wave encounter where they spawn in. For groups, though this is mostly for the deathstalker fight at the end, you can use a triple light heavy when the boss does its slam animation to spawn them in, which will happen at half health, so that you finish them as they spawn in, so long as you're 100% confident that your spacing is good. Range stun also has its place here to deal with them with the chain effect. There isn't really much else to say of Mutated Creeps, as they're the weakest enemy in the game. So long as you avoid their death explosion, they shouldn't really give you any particular worries. The only big no-no would be using your ult to hit groups of Grimm that have Mutated Creeps in them, as the death explosion will hit you as you're coming out from your invincibility frames. Now for the Mutated Beowolf. This enemy is interesting given that its stun works differently to the other Grimm. To stun these Grimm, you can either counter their attack as they swing for you or shoot them once. The best method would be shooting it to stun, since there's no need to wait for it to attack first. There's actually also no stun indicator above its head this time when you do stun it, only the animation it does when one of those conditions are met, either countering or shooting it, where it will shoot its head back really fast and then bring it back down and hang it down low. This stun lasts for a very short period of time, so you need to act quickly if you want to start doing some damage. Much like the Ursa Major, it cannot be team attack stunned after doing a charged heavy on it. It also won't allow long periods of time between your hits before it shakes it off and is able to act again. The Revenge Strike threshold of the mutated Beowolf is 3, which is the second lowest in the game, next to the white androids. There are 3 main ways you can go about dealing with mutated Beowolves. The first way is to use an ult on it as it spawns in. Shoot it once, use a charged heavy, then use 2 uncharged heavies. Back away as it goes to counter. You can only re-stun the mutated Beowolf with a shot after it has finished its attack animation, so it's best to range B-hop back towards it once it finishes its attack and go in to do the combo again. You can also ult when it's in its Revenge Strike attack if you weren't at its spawn location to engage on it. You'll likely get hit by the final attack, but it shouldn't really matter. If you want to use no ultimate, you can use a triple light heavy as it spawns in, counter-cancel the backflip into a jump, aerial heavy, counter-cancel into jump, single bullet shot, counter-cancel into charged heavy, then the 2 uncharged heavies. Repeat the shot and charged heavy and uncharged heavy combo again for the kill. The second method is a bit better, as it does more damage. Use a triple light heavy attack on it as it spawns in. Counter-cancel the backflip into jump shoot. Counter-cancel that into a quick charged heavy. Use another jump shoot, counter-cancelled into another quick charged heavy. Repeat the jump shoot, quick charged heavy combo again for the kill. The third method is the best method, but requires some pretty precise timing to do. Start with ultimate, then use a tap shoot. You'll now use 3 quick charged heavies in a row, with each one being quickly chained into each other. Basically the moment you're able to. If you leave too long of a gap between your charged heavies, or if you charge one up for too long, the mutated Beowolf will break from its stun, and it will be suboptimal compared to the other methods, or cost you time with your speedrunning. If you wanted to use this method without an ult, you can use a triple light heavy as it spawns in, counter-cancel the backflip into a shot, and use the 3 quick charged heavies. Then after that, use a jump dash aerial heavy towards it to hit it as it's doing its Revenge Strike animation. Be sure to counter-cancel this aerial heavy into a jump dodge away from it. Re-engage with a ranged B-hop back towards it to stun it after its attack has ended, and land 1 more quick charged heavy for the kill. For groups of mutated Beowolves, it's best to try and focus one down at a time to bring their numbers down. To achieve this, you can tap shoot stun the nearby ones around you, and go for a few charged heavies onto one of them. If you space out these charged heavies between too many mutated Beowolves, you're still going to be overwhelmed by the same number of them, and thus more likely to be downed. Just be sure to go for the last mutated Beowolf that you stunned with your shot, since if you go for any of the others, their stun will have worn off before you have a chance to charge up a heavy attack on them. There is one final thing to note on mutated Beowolves. That being that, despite not being able to team attack stun them, you are able to actually perform team attacks on them. This obeys the same HP threshold rule we learned earlier, of it only being able to be done on Grimm at 1/3 of their HP or less. You'll stun the mutated Beowolf as normal, then use a charged heavy. As you charged heavy, you will spam team attack. This is actually the only instance in the game where a charged heavy does not guarantee a team attack opportunity on your target. The window is also extremely small, so it needs to be spammed in anticipation of it. Note that this method is not as optimal as the others and relies purely on luck, so you'd be best off just sticking to the previous combos, though the option is there if you so wish. Just keep in mind that RWBY cannot execute her own team attacks in multiplayer. And now for the second spec tree we discussed earlier, of focusing more onto her combos rather than her ultimate, and speccing fully into her team attack. To play this is very simple. Versus anything above a Beowolf and Alpha Creep, use the following combo. Ranged combo. Counter-cancel the air attack at the end. Charged heavy. Team attack. That's it. That's how you kill any big Grimm in the game. For Ursas, the fully upgraded team attack will kill them when they reach around 1/3 of their HP or so. Combos for all the other Grimm remain the same. This build is very beginner friendly and can still pull off some great results, even in speedrunning. Should you wish to pick up speedrunning in the game, this may be the build choice for you, as it requires fewer kill combos to remember compared to the first. But in my personal opinion, the first is a lot more fun to play. If you don't have team attack upgraded, which I generally would advise in multiplayer, but you can still spec it if you wish, then you're going to be using your ultimates as finishers basically, or just inserting them when they fit. So for the most part, you're building ult gauge with triple light heavies, and then you're just going to ultimate as and when. Do keep in mind as well that any of these kill strategies can fluctuate based on the Grimm Gauntlet onslaught that you're on. It can also fluctuate in general multiplayer, due to there being more enemies present, as well as your teammates potentially attacking the same Grimm that you do. This will be especially true when you're fighting mutant Beowolves, since people will either not know how to fight them, and their spammed attacks will keep breaking the stun on the mutant Beowolf without doing any real damage to them, or, if you both know how to fight them, it can be hard to coordinate who's going to do the bullet stun without communicating it first. So, in these cases, you'll both shoot it, and since it gets stunned by one of the bullets, the second bullet is going to eat up one of those 3 hits before its Avenge Strike, even though it does reinstigate the stun. If you both then attack with a charged heavy, all 3 hits will then be used, and if you go to just charge up another charged heavy in that instance, the mutant Beowolf is going to hit you. When you're in a lobby of multiple people, and they're all attacking the mutant Beowolf at once with random attacks, if you're the one with aggro, that is, the mutant Beowolf is focused on you, it would be better to not stun it if you can help it, since the stun will just break pretty much straight away, and it will hit you. And since this can be done almost back to back, if you try and stand still and keep attacking it, it's likely just going to chain you out in a stun lock. This is especially true when a Weiss is in the lobby, as they often just spam ranged attacks anyway, since Weiss's ranged is very good. So it'll instigate a stun, and then it'll break pretty much straight away from attacks. So just be sure to keep an eye out of people shooting it, regardless of character. And now for the big one, the Mutated deathstalker. This fight needs a little bit of explanation first. The boss's weak spot is its tail. First we'll discuss how to damage the tail properly when it's down, then we'll discuss how the boss behaves, so we know how to go in to deal this damage. It's worth noting here that the Deathstalker will still take chip damage from attacks while its tail is up, or even when it's burrowed underground. So firstly, the tail. The tail will remain down for around 5 seconds or so, or until 500 damage has been done to it, whichever condition is met first. There are damage values in this game which can be displayed with mods. If you're worried numbers are going to confuse things, there's no need to worry, as there's no real need to know the numbers, since the combos are already set out and done for you. But either way, I'll put a link down in the description below of a spreadsheet for damage if you're curious. Now the thing about the Deathstalker's tail is that it will take its tail back after it reaches 500 damage, but if you hit it with a hard-hitting ability when it's near that 500 damage threshold, any damage that went over that limit will not be deducted. Meaning that if you were to get the damage to around 490, and then hit it just purely for example for 510 damage at the end with a single hit, the tail will take 1000 damage total during that tail cycle. This can allow us to kill the Mutated Deathstalker a lot quicker than usual. The only issue with this is that if you choose to use specs which have ult fully upgraded, the upgraded ult is going to hit a total of 3 times. The hit at the end is actually what does the real damage of the ult, but the 2 hits before it will always deal 520 damage total, no matter which upgrade you invest into. So it will always immediately hit the threshold and make it retract its tail before the final hit can land for the big damage. But here's where it gets interesting. RWBY's rank 1 ultimate hits only a single time, and for a total of 600 damage. It also has a quick cast time. This means that we can actually respec on chapter 10 to only have a single ranked ultimate, where you'll get the tail close to that 500 damage threshold with your usual attacks, and then use your ultimate at the end to whack it over the limit with that 600 damage ult. The first combo would be use a charged heavy on the tail when it's down, then use an uncharged heavy, then use RWBY's ultimate. This does a total of 1080 damage. The second combo would be use a triple light heavy, counter-cancelling the backflip into an ultimate. This does a total of 1025 damage. Note that if anything is around you and trying to attack, you'll likely counter one of them instead of counter-cancelling the backflip, and it may cause you to miss your re-engage to try and ult to the tail, making you deal no damage and costing an ultimate in the process. The third combo would be use her triple light heavy, 3 light attacks, and then your ultimate. This will only deal a little bit more damage, but it benefits more towards your hit streak for your ult gain. This does 1050 damage, but leaves you a lot more exposed, so should only be used when you know you're safe. Between these 3 combos, I like to use the second one most in general terms, unless I'm sure I can get away with the third. The second combo does less damage, but out of all of them it has a good balance between getting hit streak towards your ultimate, whilst not remaining exposed for too long. Gaining more hit streaks will gain you more ultimates during the fight, which you will need across the course of the battle. You can also use the heavy portion of the triple light heavy to knock androids or anything else away that may have gotten near. Now we need to understand how the boss behaves. The boss has 4 separate stages, which occur at increments of 25% health. From 100% to 75% is the first phase, and this is when you engage on it. It will do a total of 2 attacks before putting down its tail. The first attack will either be a double slash with its pincers or a ground slam. If it uses the pincer move, the second move will always be the spinning attack where it shoots out some spikes. If it uses the ground slam, it will always follow it up with its acid rain attack. Regardless of which 2 moves it used, it will then place down its tail. The second phase is from 75% to 50% health, where it will spawn in 4 regular creeps and a white android. It will then do a series of 4 attacks, which will always end with the spinning attack that shoots out the spikes, letting you know that the tail is about to come down, along with counting the attacks it used. The attacks it uses here are completely set in stone and will always be the same. It will always use its acid rain, pincer slash, ground slam, and then its spike spin. A very big thing to note here is that since it will always begin the sequence with its acid rain attack, when it transitions from its first phase into its second and spawns in those creeps before burrowing underground, if you were to shift your attention to those creeps while the boss is tunnelled away, it's quite likely that you can get one shot by its acid rain attack from off screen, while your focus was drawn to those creeps. So to counter this, we're just going to kill the creeps as they spawn in. After the second tail cycle on the boss, regardless of which combo you picked, it will cause the creeps to spawn in. Knowing this, you'll charge a triple light heavy after the boss knocks you away from retracting its tail, and aim it at the front of the boss where the creeps will spawn in to instantly take them out. From 50% to 25% health, it will enter its third phase, where it will spawn in 4 mutated creeps and a red android. In this phase, it will use a single random attack before then planting down its tail. For the mutated creeps, you'll want to, again, triple light heavy them as they spawn in, so long as you're at a safe distance away from them. If you do it too close and get caught by at least 2 explosions, you'll get one shot. It's worth noting that the androids that spawn in during the fight will spawn infinitely, so turning your attention to kill them is a waste of time. From 25% health until the end of the fight is the 4th phase, where the boss will spawn in 4 alpha creeps. It will then do 3 acid rain attacks at the player before setting down its tail. Please note here that if you do not face the front of the mutated deathstalker while it's above ground, it will burrow itself underground again. It needs to do its attack sequence before it will make itself vulnerable and place down its tail. So standing to the side and hitting it for chip damage is just going to make it re-burrow and prolong the fight, increasing the odds that you're going to get downed. So if you've ever wondered why the fight sometimes takes an eternity to finish, that will likely be the main reason why. You do not need to stand directly in front of its face by any means, but you do need to be facing it, and you need to not be on the other side of the map or anything like that when it does. It's also worth noting that if it burrows too many times without having a chance to complete its combos, it will reach a point where it will resurface and just instantly put its tail down. This may seem like a good idea since you have to deal with fewer attacks, but it's a lot slower than just killing it normally, so it's better to just let it attack. Remember, any extra time spent in this fight is just making it more likely you'll get down from something. It's advisable though for this fight that when the androids spawn in, that you crowd control them before the deathstalker puts down its tail. The red one is almost mandatory to crowd control during this time, but it's a good idea to do it to the white one also if you have the time. Knowing when it's going to place its tail down though, we can use this information to crowd control the red android before it happens. Without the androids, this fight would actually be pretty easy, but it's their constant interference from the 3-combo strike and off-screen grenades that make it so dizzying to do amongst everything else you have to focus on. Just before the mutated deathstalker is getting near to putting its tail down, you can use a ranged stun combo on the red android, or just simply counter it. If time allows, you can use a quick charged heavy here to put it into a team attack stun. Once it's stunned, turn your focus to the tail that's about to come down, and use one of the aforementioned combos on it. Again, it is advised to stun the white android as well as you can, but given that it dodges your range stun quite easily by sidestepping, and isn't overly worth moving towards, it can be a better idea to put yourself between it with the mutated deathstalker, and allow the grenades to bounce off of it. It will take 8 cycles of its tail to kill the mutated deathstalker, but this can be lowered to 7 if you can hit it with about 8 triple light heavy combos whilst its tail isn't down with chip damage. If you do not wish to respec for Chapter 10, which arguably would be faster to complete the mission with fully upgraded ult before you even get to the mutated deathstalker, this is also doable. It is worth mentioning also that online lag can allow you to deal more than 500 damage to the deathstalker's tail when it's down, similar to how you can get more than 12 hits against the Ursa Major when it's stunned. So long as you're not the host, you can actually keep your fully upgraded ult, and if the connection is a bit shaky, it will allow the full ultimate to go through and deal masses of damage to the tail. But you can also keep to the fully upgraded ult in single player or if you're hosting, in which case you need to change strategy a little bit. You will follow all the above rules, but rather than the above combos, you'll use these ones instead. The first is quick charged heavy, uncharged heavy, quick charged heavy. The second is quick charged heavy, jump light attack, heavy attack to use her aerial heavy, counter cancel into quick charged heavy. You can choose either combo you like as the damage they do is very similar, though I do prefer the second as it gives slightly more hit streak towards ultimate. The second also has the advantage of being airborne, so you can jump over the white android's bullets if you didn't manage to crowd control it beforehand, whereas heavies on the ground can be easily interrupted by the bullet spread. At the end of the day though, the choice is up to you with what you're more comfortable with. These are also the combo methods of choice for the other spec that uses the single hitting ultimate if you're wanting a combo to use that doesn't include an ult. All the while the mutated deathstalker has its tail up, you'll be spamming your triple light heavy attack at it to deal damage and using ultimates on it when you're able, which still does some great chip damage. If you're not comfortable with getting close to it, you can also tap shoot it from a safe distance, which will build up your combo meter really fast. Even if you're not the fastest tap shooter out there, it will still gain you some benefit to your ultimate, rather than being too scared to get close and making you end up doing nothing the whole fight, but wait for the tail to come down. If you do choose to engage on it face first, there's actually a pretty solid engage you can do on it at the start of the fight. This is a mixture of RNG, timing and execution, but you don't really have anything to risk by going for it at the start. The boss can only put you into red health, but not much more. You just need to make sure your back is not facing any spikes behind you so the boss can't knock you backwards into them and potentially cause a death. Only the Deathstalker's acid rain attack can one-shot you from full. The others will just red bar, and then pose no additional threat afterwards, since there's no other enemies on the screen just yet, so you really have nothing to lose by going for this setup. The boss has a set spawn location, so you will walk to this location as shown on the screen. Before it does, you'll want to charge up a triple light heavy, then hit it with the heavy portion as it spawns in. As Merlot is saying, to this, you start charging up your triple lights, ready to heavy the Deathstalker as it spawns in. If you're practicing by repeating the boss over and over by intentionally downing yourself or using GVK commands, it will spawn in when RWBY's dialogue gets to her saying deathstalker when you reset the battle. If timed perfectly, your full heavy attack will connect. If you miss part of the attack, don't worry, as it's much better to get the timing right than to land the full attack. The timing basically being you want to leave enough time during the window before its attack to charge up another triple light, so that when its attack comes, you can dodge it and then use the heavy portion in its face. The timing for this will vary slightly depending on your FPS, so you'll have to see what works best for you. But a few tests against the boss and you should get more of an idea of when you should initiate to give you the time to charge those triple lights before dodging. We're actually hoping in this instance that it starts with its ground slam ability, meaning that acid rain will follow after. After you dodge its ground slam, you'll have enough time to use another triple light heavy as it does its acid rain attack, where you'll then counter cancel it into an ultimate to take advantage of the invincibility frames and nullify the acid rain while still doing damage. You'll then dodge its tail as it slams it down, use one of the combos mentioned just now on it, dodge as it retracts its tail, triple light heavy it as it goes underground, and then you can aim RWBY in the direction of its burrow and use her ultimate, which will still deal damage while it's underground while travelling to its next location.
A mutated deathstalker!
Don't be shy, students. You could learn a lot from this enhanced specimen. They won't teach you a thing about this back at home. Nature couldn't make a beast this deadly, so I did.
If you get the timings off and it uses an attack that's going to hit you before you can execute the triple light heavy, and you know it will hit, you'll forego the triple light heavy, dodge its attack before using whatever heavy you had charged up to in that moment. This all may seem like a bit much, but it gains more overall damage than any other opener right off the bat, and given that you have no risk of death for simply trying to go for it, it's totally worth it. And now for the regular deathstalkers in multiplayer. This is going to be pretty short and sweet. For these you can use a triple light heavy, counter cancelled into double light heavy. You can also use a triple light heavy counter cancelled into quick charged heavy if you want to shake things up, but the first combo will gain you more hit streak for ultimate. Most of the time you'll be facing them when they're all grouped up, but there will be instances where you need to kill one just by itself. The above combos for these small situations will serve you just fine, but remember it can fluctuate a little bit depending if it's on a higher Grimm Gauntlet onslaught or if they've been damaged from other players. And with that, we have concluded kill strategies for each enemy for RWBY in Grimm Eclipse. But now we need to learn how to put it together, since you're not just going to approach a group of Grimm and use the individual kill strategies for each singular one. So now we're going to learn how to fight with RWBY in general terms in Grimm Eclipse. This section will differ slightly from the kill strategies as there is no go-to thing per se that you should be doing each and every time, since each encounter will be different. Even if you speedrun the game, you do not have complete control over what happens by memorising spawns and set wave encounters. You're simply just minimising what's out of your control by trying to make things more consistent, but we'll cover more of that at the speedrunning segment at the end. For this part though, we're going to focus on general tips that you should be doing or noticing when going about general advanced play. The number one thing that comes to mind when I think of this is triple light heavy positioning. It's very common if you've ever seen people playing as RWBY when they use triple light heavy to just use it on one Grimm, whilst others are still heading towards them from behind. Or if they do multi-hit, they're not getting the most out of it, since if it was angled a little better, they could have hit 2 extra Grimm instead of the 3 they just did. 3 is still okay, but for the same investment you could have hit 5, which is obviously going to be better. The dodge mechanic we learned much earlier in the guide of using a dodge after the 3 light attacks and then using a heavy is what's going to allow you to reposition so fluidly in the moment. You can use the minimap in the top left to see where a majority of the Grimm are heading in from, Even if you already committed to an attack, let's say for example on a couple of Grimm at the start of the fight when the others were still spawning in, you may come to realise that before you used the heavy portion of your attack, a few others had spawned in from behind. You can use this opportunity to redirect your triple light heavy in the opposite direction, while still hitting the original Grimm you were fighting by dashing past it before turning around. The thing is, you don't even necessarily need to turn your camera, at least not right in the given moment, since you already know where the Grimm are going to be by the minimap. Multi-hitting as many Grimm as possible with a single attack is single-handedly going to take your gameplay from average to something much greater right off the bat. Say for instance you were going to triple light heavy a pack of 3 Beowolves, but 3 more were coming up from behind. If you turn to face that heavy portion of the triple light to face all of them, that's going to be 6 separate Beowolves that you now have the chance to proc a team attack on, from the heavy portion of the attack. And as we learned in the kill strategy section, the attack will kill a Beowolf outright if a team attack is procced. What are the chances of you team attacking all 6 of them? Not very likely, though it can happen, but you're increasing the power of the attack tenfold by just using it smartly to give you a bigger edge in your gameplay. Something worth mentioning is that RWBY's triple light heavy also has a small hitbox behind her. With this in mind, you're also able to sometimes dash past a Grimm to reach one that's further away from you, while still hitting the one behind you so long as it remains in range. The hitbox is not too big, you have to keep in mind, so if you dive too far forward, you'll end up missing the target behind you and have to turn around to deal with it anyway, which would then become the same as if you engaged both targets separately. Now we know all of this, how do we actually fight? Well, for the most part in general combat, you're basically just spamming triple light heavy, counter-cancelling them into each other into groups of enemies to hit the most targets possible, with perhaps the occasional different attack thrown in there when the situation fits, like with double light heavy to finish off a Grimm that would obviously get massively overkilled by triple light heavy for example. You'll be using your ultimates in there too, to either quickly kill a target or several targets, or when you can see there's a load of enemies around you, making the ultimate extremely effective to hit everything surrounding you. The thing is though, if we just leave it at that, with me saying just use triple light heavy and ultimate on its own, even if it sounds very simple on paper, it has many other factors to it, which is arguably where the how to fight portion really comes in. So if you don't incorporate all the other factors we learned beforehand, like adding a dash after the 3 light string before using heavy, aiming it to face as many enemies as possible, or being aware of that hitbox behind you when you use triple light heavy, just to name a few examples, you're going to majorly underperform if you just flat out spam triple light heavy. The thing I'm trying to equip you with primarily with this guide is how to use the tools you're given to get the most out of them and things to be aware of. The rest I'm leaving up to you, since you're going to need to improvise in the moment and make decisions based on what occurs. What can also make combat differ slightly as well is which mode you're playing on. So what I'm going to do here is cover all 3 modes, so Horde, Gauntlet and Campaign, and how you would go about these different situations. Please note here that a fair few of these concepts will go outside the scope of RWBY herself, as they're more so just general ideas and concepts based around the mode itself that you need to conform to, rather than it being purely character specific. So firstly for Horde. Collecting enemies at spawn locations to ult down effectively is a great way to go about fights, but you also need to be keeping an eye out for the control centre, as that is your primary objective to protect. So enemies that get near to the control centre while you're fighting can be shot to get their attention. This is called tagging an enemy. When things are spawning in for the next part of the wave, it's often very easy to get too focused on a big Grimm that has spawned in, for example, and to tunnel vision it until it's killed. But whilst you were doing this, more Grimm was spawning around you and heading right for the control centre, where you only get snapped out of your tunnel visioning once port mentions it to you that the control centre's been attacked. So my advice on this would be to fight proactively with the control centre in mind, rather than having to be reminded of its existence mid-fight. So, whilst you're fighting other things, it's extremely useful to keep an eye on your minimap with the control centre in range of it and look out for any red dots that are heading towards it, so that you know you need to tag those enemies off from attacking the control centre and instead make them go for you, where you can then deal with them with the rest of the Grimm you're fighting. Manipulation of enemies is also important, so you don't want to just be standing still in the same place 24/7. You want to be moving in a way where they're collected up. I like to call this herding the Grimm, by manipulating their movements with your own to bunch them all up and bring them together, making your ults far more effective. You don't always need to ultimate down the Grimm when they're grouped up as well, mind you, since you're not always going to have those available. So in those situations, you're just going to group up the Grimm and rely on trusty old triple light heavies to take the group down as a whole. Now for turrets. In a straightforward general sense, shotguns are greater than machine guns, and basically everything else, though there are optimal ways to build turrets. Near the control centres, you should build shotguns, since shotguns are obviously more effective at close range, and if Grimm get too near to the control centre, they're going to take the full blast of the shotguns. Pretty self-explanatory. For turret stations that aren't too near the control centres, shotguns are obviously going to be less effective, so you can either go for grenade launchers for some flat damage against the Grimm, or you can go for ice launchers to make your own combat against the Grimm more effective. Long range, you'll just build machine guns, since they don't have a range requirement for effectiveness, but they're arguably the weakest of the bunch, though they do a pretty good job at stun-locking enemies with constant bullet barrage. Another tip is to not fight around the control centre, as attacks made towards you can hit the control centre also. This is especially detrimental if you're fighting things around the node and white androids are trying to shoot grenades at you, which are just hitting the control centre. Or, if you're running away from a mutant Beowolf's triple swing past the control centre, and having its attacks land against it since its triple swing has a pretty long range. It's worth noting as well that the pots and crates which are scattered about the map can be broken for ultimate meter, but if you were to simply shoot them, it's going to gain you barely any meter at all. So a better method would be to go up to them and charged heavy them down, since heavy attacks are the most effective way to gain meter. But because the pots and crates break in a single hit, your triple light heavy and double light heavy aren't really going to be that effective, so a charged heavy attack is going to be the most effective way to gain meter off them. If you were to do this at the start of the level, while it's still counting down, you can gain pretty much half an ult gauge before the game even begins. As waves get more advanced, you'll likely start to encounter different Grimm types, as well as more enemies in general. So while collecting Grimm to ult down is a great strategy, it won't always be feasible to collect them all into one group for an ultimate, since they're going to be too spaced out, in which case triple light and heavy would be likely more effective. So long as you keep the control centre quite literally on your radar throughout the fight, and tag any enemies that happen to get near it, as well as manipulating spawns with your movements, you shouldn't really have too much trouble, and should get flawless waves a majority of the time. When security nodes start to get split up around the map, it would be best to build a turret or two at one control centre while you go to the other, so that they're both covered. This can get a bit trickier when you have 3 or 4 on the go to protect, in which case I'd recommend putting turrets at the nodes furthest away from you and protecting 2 nodes that are the closest to each other by yourself. Money also, which is called lien, is also important to manage. Sometimes it's best not to just dump all your cash onto turrets around a node when you could instead save it for later waves. This is especially true when it's a map where old security nodes will despawn and will become irrelevant for the rest of the map, so in which case any turrets around it will become pretty much irrelevant for the rest of the game. An example of this kind of map would be Emerald Forest. On the flip side, some maps will go through all the waves with every single security node active until the end of the game, in which case it's more likely that the first security node would have suffered the most damage come the later waves of the match, so having permanent turrets around it, while still keeping some lien spare for the other security nodes, would be the most beneficial. Gauntlet is a bit different to Horde since there's no actual end to it, so this makes Gauntlet a bit less objective intensive compared to Horde, since you're basically just trying to survive. The main tips I can give though is that there are set spawn locations around the map based on what wave you're on. So, for example, the first 3 waves of Gauntlets on Emerald Forest are going to occur in the area where you spawn in. Then waves 4 to 6 will occur in the areas outside of the cave if you were to travel through it, or across the bridge and up the slope. Waves 7 to 10 are going to occur back in the area you were fighting, but slightly further up ahead. So they'll happen within the cave, and just a little bit further up ahead than when you spawned into the level. Knowing spawn locations of Grimm and in what waves they can come about is going to make your ults tremendously more effective, since you know when and where Grimm will spawn in. The first 10 waves are pretty straightforward, so you're basically just going to work up to Onslaught 2 so that new strategies can be implemented. You can still collect Grimm at spawn points, meanwhile, and ult them down effectively, similar to Horde mode, but just be wary of what your teammates are doing that could interrupt this, like a Blake stun-blading everything, making the Grimm too spread out to ult down, or with teammates just generally hard engaging everything, including the ones you're trying to gather. Once Onslaught 2 hits ideally, you would have a Jean on your team, because Jean's 100% damage ult with its extra duration talented, combined with RWBY's triple light heavy, is absolutely broken. You can either choose to play the map in a few ways as well, either with full turrets, low turrets, or with no turrets. Full turrets is generally how most people play when they play Gauntlet, where they just place a turret on every single available station. Most beginners will just put a machine gun at every station, while more experienced players will opt for shotguns and maybe 1 or 2 other options. Playing with full turrets is pretty effective, but in my personal opinion is a very two-dimensional and very boring way to play the game, since when masses of enemies are spawning in, because there's turrets all over the map, they're going to aggro to the turrets before they do to you. And what you end up getting is like 3 or 4 Grimms circling around each turret station, making them incredibly spread out around the map in little groups. While shotguns are going to do a decent job at taking out these little groups since they're so close, it makes your own combat a lot less relevant, and you can even just sit back and relax while the turrets do the work, whilst just rebuilding the ones that got destroyed. It becomes a lot less like playing Grimm Eclipse, and more so like a tower defense game in that regard. So personally, I'm not really a big fan of it, but feel free to play how you wish. Low turret is when you do build turrets still, but just not that many of them, and usually that they're all concentrated in one area. So let's say for Mountain Glen for example, you build turrets exclusively on the left side of the map, where everything is going to bunch up really nicely, and so long as all the players remain over there too, any Grimm that spawn across the map are going to have to come to you, since that's where all the players and turrets are located for the Grimm to aggro to. This allows a mixture of your own combat, as well as the effectiveness from the turrets to complement your gameplay, rather than being the main component of it. No turret is pretty self-explanatory, but in my opinion is one of the most fun ways to play Gauntlet. No turret puts a huge emphasis on teamwork in order to perform well, rather than relying on turret damage, and because with no turrets, the Grimm are now only able to aggro towards players, so it means that good coordination is going to be key to taking down the packs. In an ideal world now, a Weiss or a Blake would notice the mass collection of Grimm, jump in and freeze ult, where a Jean, if he hadn't already, would see the huge amount of frozen Grimm and pop his damage ultimate to set you up to jump in and instigate your own ultimate within the middle of the frozen pack with your damage buff active, preferably alongside another character with a hard-hitting ult like Pyrrha, Yang or Nora, with Nora having her own damage buff enabled also as they ult along with you. RWBY's ult, when fully upgraded, falls into the category of hard-hitting ults, so this makes her a very effective teammate in these sorts of situations. Even if you don't have any ults available, just triple light heavying into the frozen targets with the Jean buff active is going to make you an extremely useful teammate, A lot more so than a Pyrrha who has no ults available, for example. You also need to keep in mind that damaging Gauntlet is currently bugged, and always has been as far as I know. The damage of the Grimm is meant to scale along with their health with each onslaught, but currently the damage increase only applies to the host of the lobby, while everyone else takes regular damage from the Grimm. So eventually it gets to the stage where the host will be downed in a single hit, no matter which attack they take, whilst everyone else can pretty much just fight normally. And now for campaign. For this mode, there are a few different strategies you can use, but I'm going to teach you my personal favourite, which is hard engaging. When you move to an area, the Grimm will start spawning in unless some dialogue needs to happen first. But there will never be a time in the game when you're suddenly caught off guard by 10 Grimm surrounding you out of the blue. They have to spawn in first. When Grimm are spawning in, you can engage right away. There's no need to wait for them all to gather up, especially if you're not too experienced with the game. Don't give them the chance and just jump in there and start beating on them. If Beowolves, for example, are spawning in, you can focus on the one that spawned in first and engage on it with jump dash, aerial heavy, triple light heavy combo we learned earlier to guarantee to kill the Beowolf. But then you also redirect the heavy portion of the attack at the others that have spawned in and are now chasing you. If you combine the instant engage tactic with the principle we learned about aiming your triple lights and heavy properly, you'd be amazed how many Grimm you can take down right off the bat, before everything is even fully spawned in, making the fights you go into much easier, as there are now fewer numbers. You can also fight closer to the Grimm with the knowledge that ults have their invincibility frames, so it allows you to fight nearer to your targets, but you can always use the ult to get you out of trouble. In general fighting, I tend to always like keeping at least one ult spare, rather than dumping them all at once, since if you make a mistake, an ult acts as a great safety belt to knock things away to counteract your mistake. By moving in closer as well to fight, you'll be allowing your light attacks to hit also, which will give you more hit streak and thus more ults, and therefore more safety belts, so it kind of has this synergy where it works together. While we're on the subject of safety belts, this might be a good time to mention team attacks. Team attacks can be executed at any time, apart from when you're ulting. This means that you can actually use team attacks to cancel the down portion of your grounded attacks, where you're usually left wide open. A good example of this would be if I was fighting a regular Beowolf, and my first triple light heavy didn't kill it, so I went in to use a double light heavy, as more enemies were heading towards me. If there's an enemy nearby with a team attack on it, you can use the double light heavy to finish off the Beowolf, and then press the team attack button after the heavy has landed to execute the team attack and nullify the down portion of your combo. You could argue that this then puts you into the same scenario when you come out of your team attack animation because of that slight pause or stutter that happens after the animation finishes, and then you're just left wide open again. But if you have at least 1 point invested into RWBY's team attack upgrade, it will cause a knockback. This knockback is going to give you a safety net where you execute the team attack to cancel the down portion of your attack, but then it knocks away everything around you, providing there's no Grimm with uncancelable attack animations within that group, who are in the middle of a swing as you do it. I will say this is more effective in single-player situations, simply because you can execute your own team attacks there, and also you don't run the risk of a teammate taking the team attack that was going to bail you out, and likely just causing you to get hit anyway. It's also less feasible in multiplayer, as teammates need to be quite near to you in order for team attacks to be able to be procced. Same goes for you. If you try to team attack set up a Grimm when there's no teammates nearby, it won't work. They need to be in quite a close proximity to you. The only exception is if you charged heavy a stun target, in which case it will always set up a team attack, regardless of distance. Even though fighting up close is how I generally like to play, there are going to be some instances where you can't fight near to your targets. This can either be due to lack of experience, or just the mixture of numbers of Grimm being too messy to competently keep an eye on everything that they're doing all at the same time. For this, you're going to be fighting a little less upfront with the Grimm, but you're still going to be attacking them effectively. Because triple light and heavy is pretty much your bread and butter combo, and is the move you'll be using about 90% of the time into groups among ult usages and whatnot. But because it's a move that just so happens to be one we can counter-cancel, which is great, don't get me wrong, it also means that there are more elements of danger to its usage. What I'm going to do here in this next section is explain these triple light heavy factors alongside the safer way of fighting when you're too overwhelmed, so it can give you an idea of the things you should be thinking about when you're engaged in combat. But do keep in mind that the triple light heavy factors will apply at all times, no matter which mode you're playing, or which method of fighting you choose to adopt. So I'm just going to insert it here, because I feel like it segues nicely into the safer method of fighting. But again, these factors will always be applicable. So firstly, it's going to be counter-cancelling your triple light heavies. While you do want to make sure that you hit as many things as possible with it, there are going to be instances, like on higher difficulties or in Grimm Gauntlet, etc., where Grimm are going to go for a swing for you as you attack. In that moment, you need to assess two things. First is, do I have time to make my attack go off? Second is, if I do, and I counter-cancel the backflip, am I going to counter a Grimm? The first is pretty self-explanatory, but still has some factors, like not only the time you have for the light attacks themselves to come out, but also the dodge utility you have also. If you forego your combo when you could have dodged the attack, that's obviously going to make you worse off. If you forego the attack, but instead you could have quickly sidestepped the swing, if it's not that close, that's also going to make you worse off. The second question of, if I do counter-cancel the backflip, am I going to counter a Grimm, is also important because of how counters work. If you counter a Grimm, RWBY will fly towards it, as will any other character besides Pyrrha. Although less punishing, counters also have that little stutter afterwards, like ultimates and team attacks do. And if you suddenly counter that Beowolf, for example, when you were meant to counter-cancel the backflip, you might find that you've pulled yourself into the middle of a pack of Grimm, as well as making yourself vulnerable with that stutter. This could spell big trouble if you don't get out of there fast enough. Now, Beowolves are a bit different because you can actually use your damage to interrupt their attacks, but when there's a group of mixed Grimm, and some have uncancelable attack animations within those groups, like Alpha Beowolves, Boars, Ursas, and Mutant Beowolves, you're going to need to be extra careful when you fight. First, let's take a look at an example of what not to do, now we know more about triple light heavy usage in combat. If you look here, you'll see in this demo that I'm spamming triple light heavies with pretty poor positioning at some Beos and Alpha Beos mixed together. Here I go to use yet another triple light heavy on the pack, but the Alpha Beowolf had already started its attack animation, which can't get interrupted by my damage. I end up countering the Alpha Beowolf and it flings me right into the midst of the pack. If you're not experienced, you may not be so quick to realise what position it's left you in, and it'll already be too late before you can make it out. In the very same clip, I use yet another triple light heavy with poor positioning, but this time, instead of countering an Alpha Beowolf, its attack just goes through, since it cannot be knocked back. This attack ends up hitting me, which then gets changed right into another Alpha Beo's attack to put me at red health. This could have easily become a death if some other Alpha Beos were just a fraction of a bit closer to me. So notice how I said I had poor positioning, which is true if I was meaning to be fighting more passively, whereas here it was almost like I was trying to fight in close quarters. Better positioning would be standing out of their attack ranges as I charge up triple lights and aiming the heavies at the whole group. If you want to play extra safe, you can also just not counter-cancel the backflip in these instances, and just time it for when you land on the floor before you commit to another triple light heavy string, to save yourself from accidentally countering into the group. With good positioning and no counter-cancels in your combos, it's almost virtually impossible to be hit by anything in this instance. Again, do note that these triple light heavy factors will be applicable no matter which mode you choose or which style of fighting you choose to adopt, but it becomes pretty relevant, especially when you're being made to fight passively and uncancelable attack animation Grimm are present. If you don't wish to backtrack, I'll put the ones which can't be cancelled by damage here again, as I only brushed over them earlier. So again, you need to ask yourself the question, If I go to counter-cancel the backflip, am I going to counter a Grimm? It all may seem like a lot to take in at first, but remember, you're not physically asking these questions in your head word for word in the moment. They're just concepts and ideas that you'll become more fluent in as you practice, until it almost feels like second nature. The second thing to mention, though this is more to do with the player's side of things, is that occasionally you will mess up how many light attacks you use before doing a heavy. When you're jumping around constantly using abilities, it's just going to happen that every now and then you do an input error. If you miss doing that additional light attack and end up doing a double light heavy, it's not really the end of the world, it was just more suboptimal. However, if you input one too many light attacks, RWBY will then use her 4 light string combo, which cannot be followed by a heavy at all, and will make her airborne. Whilst you're not exactly wide open up there, it does mean the Grimm are now free to do what they want upon your arrival back down, especially if you continue doing airborne attacks to keep you suspended up there even longer. The good thing about this is that we actually have a way to fix this problem. When these situations occur, you need to notice your mistake and press the counter button as fast as you're able to drop to the ground faster, basically just counter-cancelling your error. This can take a second or two to notice at first since you did not expect to make a mistake, but the sooner you recover, the sooner you can land and start attacking normally again, whilst not giving the Grimm any breathing space. Sometimes in these cases, however, you may notice that a Beowolf, for example, is going to swing for you in time to you doing one of these input errors. In these sorts of cases, it wouldn't actually be a bad idea to let a portion of your attack go through, so it interrupts the Beowolf's attack before you counter to drop back to the floor. Sometimes though, the rules we learned earlier apply of asking the question, will I counter a Grimm on my way down? The third thing is noticing what the Grimm themselves are doing around you. Like we spoke about just now, you need to notice if you're going to counter something if you counter your backflip. But what about those Grimm that can't be countered but are still a threat? Prime examples of these would be creeps and alpha creeps burrowing towards you, or white androids and their grenades. These sorts of things can be noticed in two ways, both sight and sound. Sight is pretty obvious since you'll just see the attack coming as you're fighting something else, and you can adapt to the rule earlier of asking, do I have time to attack? For sound though is a little trickier, but luckily enough both the creep and alpha creep sound is pretty loud, and the sound comes about 2 seconds before the attack actually lands, so it gives you plenty of opportunity to get out of the way. You can hear grenades being launched by white androids also, but unfortunately these are a lot quieter, to the point of good luck hearing them amongst everything else in packed fights. Plus they also hit you a lot quicker than a creep burrow. This is what makes white androids so deadly. Getting familiar with Grimm sounds and what Grimm are doing around you is going to save you many deaths in the future, but again is going to be something you become more proficient at with practice. Like I said earlier though, we all make mistakes, and I am definitely no exception. So how do we fight when our backs are on the ropes? Sometimes running away passively waiting to regen aura is a good strategy, but what if you simply made a mistake and know you can carry on fighting, but don't want to risk taking that one extra hit that's going to down you? Well, in this instance, there's actually a very effective strategy we can adapt with RWBY's triple light heavies. You can get some range from what you're fighting, then when it's getting closer to you, start aiming your triple lights away from the Grimm, then turning back round to use the heavy portion on them, rinse and repeat. With proper spacing, this will actually leave no gap for the Grimm to come round to the side or behind you, and you'll just hit everything at once, and also knock most, if not all of them away. You may wonder why you don't just fight like this generally, since it seems a lot safer, and you're getting pretty much everything hit all at once. Well, because of your spacing, you're actually not going to be hitting every single Grimm equally with your damage, and some will only get chipped, which becomes more prominent as Grimm get knocked away and have to re-engage while others don't. It's also just a lot slower than just hard engaging everything, since you're basically playing this little chasing game of to and fro, rather than everything being in one area to take out efficiently. You'll also just find yourself needing this strategy a lot less when you learn how Grimm behave, which will be covered in the Grimm behaviour section coming up after this general combat section. Now we can look at kill strategy opportunities. Even if your general combat has triple light heavies being spammed, there are going to be moments where kill strategies can be quickly inserted. If you just knocked a load of Beowolves away, for example, but a Boarbatusk went to attack and missed you, but wasn't knocked away because of its uncancelable attack, or just wasn't knocked away too far at all, you can assess that in the moment and quickly move in to use an ultimate on the boar, whilst the Beowolves are still recovering. All this is doing is just spotting the triple light heavy bhop ult combo that we learned in the boar kill strategy section, but seeing how the strategy arose to slot into place like pieces of a puzzle in the given moment. See how a general way of fighting then transitioned into a kill strategy that was previously learned. You'll need to just see these as they come about and see if it's safe or worthwhile for you to do so. Now for kill priority. This is pretty straightforward. The kill priority for targets in any encounter will be as follows: white android, red android, boars, mutant beowolf, Ursa, alpha beowolves. Then everything else is pretty much even in priority. The mutant beowolf order is somewhat debatable, since they still pose a pretty big threat, but the threat from off-screen grenades from white androids, the interceptional nature of the red android's attacks easily catching you out even if you're running, and balls rolling in to hit you from off-screen make them all more of a kill priority target than the mutant beowolf, in my opinion. Even if the mutant beowolf is fast, its attacks are actually pretty slow to come out, meaning that they're easily dodged. They also get stunned in a single bullet shot if you want to take them out temporarily, whereas the others you either need to range stun them or counter. Ursas also do not pose much of a threat outside of knocking you back slightly with their rock attack, but they're otherwise just really slow. If you see an opportunity when it stuns itself with its rock attack to go team attack stun it with a charged heavy before going on to a bigger threat, it's totally worthwhile to do so to keep it out of the fight that much longer until you come around to dealing with it. When you see a fight break out, you'll see which targets spawn and then take them out in the order of greatest threat to smallest by this kill order. You'll be surprised how much easier fights become when you know which targets to prioritise first. Note that single kill strategies can be very effective with kill priority orders in mind to take targets out quickly, sometimes before they even have a chance to attack. And with that, we have now covered how to fight with RWBY in Grimm Eclipse. But something that's just as important as offense is defense. Whilst we've already covered a majority of your defensive capabilities just by going through the combat section, like with dodging between attacks, or how to position, or keeping your senses about you with what Grimm are doing what, by both sight and sound, to name a few examples, it can still feel pretty daunting to be surrounded by so many Grimm at once, right? How do you know it's safe to be doing a particular thing at a particular moment? Well, there's actually a very important final piece of the puzzle we need to include, to make it all less overwhelming when you go into each fight. And that's going to be this next section called Grimm Behaviour.
Oh, more Grimm!
So in this game, Grimm actually have a default state where they will have a set attack pattern that they follow, and this pattern is consistent across every single enemy in the game while in this default state. Once an enemy spawns in, it will have a few seconds before it will go to swing for you. Thereafter, it will then have a pattern of how often it will go to attack, which will be based upon a set timing. This is the default state of Grimm, and is often how you will encounter them. In this state, no matter how many enemies are surrounding you, they will always swing one at a time. Even if you're surrounded by Grimm, they will all take it in turns to swing for you with this timer. This means that while Grimm are in this state, they will only take it in turns having a swing for you, and one Grimm will not go to swing again until each of the other Grimm have had a turn. The only exception would be if you were running away from them, and a Grimm which had already swung for you was in range to take another swing, while one which had not had a turn yet was too far away to be able to. You can abuse this knowledge in order to create openings for your own attacks, or at the very least to feel less afraid or less pressured when you're completely surrounded by Grimm. So long as they remain in their default state, and you abuse it, Grimm are essentially harmless. The second state for Grimm would apply to a few different scenarios, which may as well all be clumped together. This state is where Grimm are still obeying this swing timer, but the time between their swings becomes reduced by a certain amount. There's no set time for this, as it's basically just condensing down the timings of the default state into smaller and smaller sets, but the rules of the default states that apply here, meaning that they will still swing at the same spacing between each attack, and they will only go to swing again once all the other Grimm have had a turn. One thing to note about these clips is how I'm also dodging. You don't need to dodge away from Grimm in order to completely avoid the attack. You can instead take advantage of the invincibility frames of the dodge and remain close to them, so that you're ready to keep attacking after the dodge. So long as you time it correctly, it doesn't actually matter how you dodge, even if that means dodging directly into an Ursa's stomach when it goes to swing for you. This isn't Mario, so you're not going to take any damage from walking into the enemy's hitbox. The third and final state of Grimm is where they're at the most dangerous. In this state, the Grimm basically decide to throw all the above rules out the window, and instead just all swing for you at the same time in a flurry of slashes. If you get caught in the middle of a pack of Beowolves in this state, you are dead. No ifs, ands or buts, you are a goner. You'll get hit by one which chains you into another, which chains you into another, and when there's like 20 in a circle around you, all slashing towards the centre, you are just not going to make it out of there in one piece. I'm still not entirely sure on when and why Grimm enter the states outside of their default, but one thing you can do if you're not sure is to test the waters a bit, and let 3 Beowolves or other Grimm get near you, and stay just outside of their attack range. Now you can see how often they go to swing for you and assess the gap they leave between each of the swings. It will give you a good indication of which state the Grimm you're about to fight are in. When you get more experienced at the game, knowing the timings for these gaps and which state the Grimm are in become less and less important, given that you're constantly attacking and fighting and know how to position to make it so that their state doesn't even matter to you. The only time it becomes truly dangerous is when Grimm are in this state and there's androids about, especially if white androids are in the third state and are firing grenades at you from off screen. Now I'm going to show you an example where I just boot up a level and enter a fight with these rules in mind. I've put it on Eclipse mode just to make the numbers more overwhelming, but it will also help to emphasise my point a lot better. Here I'm just gathering up the Beowolves as they spawn in. If you're newish to the game, or just not that experienced, and can sometimes struggle with just 4 Beowolves even, seeing this many at the same time might seem a little bit scary, right? Well, once they're all gathered up, you can see that I'm just keeping the rules we just learned in mind. They're not all slashing at once, so they're not in the dangerous final state. That means that they'll be obeying the rules in some sort of way. Once you see 2 or 3 Beowolves attack, you'll get a good idea of what timing pattern the Beowolves are obeying at the present moment. It then just becomes a game of timing and not much more. Yes, I'm surrounded, but most of these are just going to circle me, but do absolutely nothing else for a fair while. Do you see how not scary it is now? It literally doesn't matter how many are on screen, so long as you can figure out the rules. Do bear in mind though that just because you figure out the rules for one fight, as you take Grimm out and more spawn in, these new Grimm are able to change the rules, meaning that eventually it will transition between states, and even though to you you're fighting the same pack, as more numbers got added and the older Grimm are replaced and siphoned out, the new ones will be replacing them with their own attack state in mind. So that about now covers everything to do with advanced play with RWBY in Grimm Eclipse. But remember, practice is still a pretty big component when it comes to things like this, or anything in general really. You can't expect to watch a guide on YouTube then become instantly savvy with what you just watched. You still need to create new pathways in your brain. Just because you can't do something at first doesn't mean that you're bad at it. Everyone has to learn how to do new things. If you want to know a little secret, when I first started playing this game, I played RWBY, and I couldn't even beat the first level on her. I thought that the Beowolves in that tiny area around the control centre in the first mission were unfair and impossible to beat. I died many times over in that section. Whatever you want to achieve, you are totally able, so long as you put your mind to it. But that's why this guide is very comeback friendly. You don't need to sit down and watch it all at once, and you do not need to watch it all in its entirety again if you need to check back on something. If you suddenly think, how do you kill alpha Beowolves again? Or what was that technique to do with advanced bunnyhops? The info is all set out for you in bite-sized chunks. Remember, if you add a brick of knowledge a day, eventually you'll have a house. Even if you learned one kill strategy per day or spent 10 minutes practicing bunny hops in between everything else you've got going on, you'll become a Grimm Eclipse pro in no time. When it comes to multiplayer, you may have to adapt any of the aforementioned methods to fit the moment, which I felt I couldn't really add much detail on in a general guide since it's all situational. But with these fundamentals in place, you'll be able to perform extremely well in multiplayer also, and even get wave MVPs even if you're a level 1 with a load of level 10s. But what if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the nitty gritty? What if you wanted to delve further into the intricacies of speedrunning the game? Well, if that's the case for you, it was necessary that we covered everything in this guide beforehand, but now we can take a look at how you would go about speedrunning Grimm Eclipse.
We did it!
Now for the speedrunning segment. This is catered primarily for the noskips category, but will also apply for any percent or inbounds, for the fights which are mandatory to be completed. Now, as well as performing well with how you play, speedrunning brings a few new things to the table as well to consider. Some things are in your control, and some things are not. The first thing that is in your control are spawn locations. Spawn locations in this game are not random, they are completely set in stone in every single encounter you face. Once a spawn location has been used by a Grimm, it will go on cooldown, and Grimm cannot spawn from that location again for a set period of time. This means that you simply can't just run to the exit leading off to the next area, and stand there letting all the Grimm use the same 3 or 4 spawn locations around you to give you an easy time. If you did that, Grimm will just start spawning on the other side of the map behind you once the spawn locations around you have been depleted, and you'll either have to go chase them down or wait for them to come to you, both of which are going to be slow. And we're speedrunning here, remember. The only time a spawn location will not go on cooldown is when you go to the next wave encounter, in which case all the spawn locations will reset. Spawn locations are based on your position, where Grimm will take the nearest spawns it can closest to where you're stood. The idea then is to manipulate the spawn locations with our positioning, and make a favourable pattern along the way to take enemies out towards the exit that leads to the next fight. This is how you'll be working towards the next areas of the mission, but when it comes to the last fight of the level, we're basically just going to be making favourable patterns to make it so we kill things quicker. So what I'm actually going to do here now is bring up a couple of screenshots of the Chapter 1 Control Centre fight, which I've marked with some red crosses to indicate where the spawn locations are for the fight. There's a couple of white arrows that I've added there as well, basically to show you that there's a couple more locations that I couldn't quite mark on the map properly with this angle, but I'm showing you where they are relative to this angle's position. You can see that it's a little bit of a mixture between groups of 2s and 3s in little sections. The whole concept is to basically try and find a pattern where you'll start somewhere, then be in a position when you kill the first lot of enemies that your location will spawn the enemies in that section in a favourable way. It also depends on what you're fighting. For this particular fight at the control centre for Chapter 1, you're basically just fighting regular creeps and Beowolves. For creeps, you want to position so that you can take them out in groups with your triple light heavy as they're spawning in. For Beowolves, you're looking for a pattern where you can herd them easily into each other to take them out with an ultimate. Ultimates, however, won't always be available, so in those cases you'll basically be doing the same thing as you do for creeps, so you can triple light heavy them as they spawn in, all grouped up to take them down together. Mostly this is done in intervals, so the first group of Beowolves you'll ultimate down, the second group you'll triple light heavy, and then the third you'll ultimate. Doing it in this way should keep your ultimate gauge pretty healthy with RWBY's hyperballistic talent in the Spectre. Even though there are spawn patterns runners follow, you'll probably find that the patterns runners follow between their speedruns vary. The patterns they follow will vary between each character as well, because each character has something they bring to the table. But if you watch 3 different RWBY runs, you'll likely see 3 different patterns being followed. This is because there is no go-to pattern that is set as a standard. People have their own ways they like to play. Whilst it's true that some patterns will be more optimal than others, it does allow some creativity to come to the table of how you want to go about a fight. Now, whilst this is a guide tailored for speedrunning as well, I do feel like listing every single spawn location for every single battle is going a little outside the scope of a character-specific guide. There are things included in this guide that's also outside the scope of a character-specific guide, but since there is very, very limited information for the game out there, I felt like including it here was also necessary, so people can actually start incorporating everything, rather than me assuming everyone already knows what counter cancels are, for example. If people do want it, I'll happily make another separate guide for spawn locations in the game, but for now I think we'll just leave it here. What I would actually instead urge you to do though, is to watch people speedrunning the game as RWBY, and see which patterns they take, now that you understand how spawns work in the game. I don't just mean me, by the way, I actually urge you to go watch multiple runners doing the same thing, so you can get different angles on how people play the game. If you hybridise knowledge from multiple different people towards the same topic, your ability to comprehend and analyse that topic is going to be astronomically bigger than those who choose to go it alone or to only study from one source. You can either copy the pattern of a run that you like the look of, or try to adapt your own based on what you see. For me, personally, I liked to copy what I saw from runs I liked the looks of, and because it was already laid out for me, you eventually come to see why the pattern was being used the way it was. Like, you'll suddenly just go to yourself, oh, we start here where 3 spawn in, because then I just have to turn around and I'm already directly facing where 2 more spawn, for example. It lets you not feel overwhelmed by just having to pull something out of the hat with your own pattern, but still allow you to study why you're doing what you're doing, which in turn will let you get more familiar with the spawn locations if you wish to make any adjustments. Of course, this is just me, and if you're one that likes the creative aspect of it, then by all means go for it. The next factor in speedrunning are 3 very famous letters, RNG, which, if you're not familiar, stands for Random Number Generator. This basically just means luck. Yes, luck plays a huge factor in this game. Even if you were to theoretically play perfectly throughout your entire run, luck is still going to be a big deciding factor of how well your run goes. RNG in this game comes in 2 separate forms. The first is wave encounter RNG. Wave encounters in this game are completely set in stone in each encounter in each area, but since there are multiple encounters for each area, this inherently is going to mean that some are more favourable than others. If you have to fight, for example, a set of 4 Beowolves, then 5 Beowolves, then 2 Alpha Creeps, then an Ursa, that's going to be a lot slower than just fighting 4 Beowolves and 2 Alpha Creeps. Even if you're killing things efficiently, wave encounter RNG is going to be a big component of what costs you time in a run. The second form of RNG, though this is a lot less punishing than the first, is spawn in time RNG. In this game, Grimm spawn in between a time of 0.5 to 1.5 seconds, the time of which, as you can guess, is totally random. There is no way to tell at what time something is going to spawn in. But how does this cost us time? Well, let's take the start of Chapter 1 for example. Right at the start of the level, there are 2 creeps that I'm going to run in and triple light heavy, before turning around to face a direction where I know 3 more are going to spawn in based on my location when I took the first 2 out. If they all spawned in at the exact same time frame each and every time, I could time my triple light to line up with it, but because it's totally random and there's literally no way to tell, I have to either predict or react to the spawn-ins. The trouble with this is one major thing. If one of them spawns in behind the others, like let's say 2 creeps spawn in really fast and the last creep is delayed, this will then force me to commit to the attack. Now, even if I commit to the attack and the third Grimm decides to spawn in as I'm doing it, my attack likely won't kill it. Why? Well, when Grimm spawn into the game, they do not take full damage until the spawning animation is complete. Usually, if you hit a regular creep with a triple light heavy, it would massively overkill it. If you catch it with that triple light heavy as it's spawning in, it still would, but if it spawns in during the heavy portion and misses the first 2 parts of the heavy attack, it won't die to the attack when it usually would. This is something else you need to keep in mind and look out for when you're in the middle of combat, so you can see which Grimm is spawning in late, so you know that you need to jump in and finish it off after, rather than automatically assuming it was already dead from your triple light heavy. So let's say the scenario happens and now there's a Grimm on the map that otherwise shouldn't be there. What's the big deal? Can't I just move in and kill it? Well sure, but look what happens when I do. I move in quickly to take it out, but because my positioning has now changed, and because I'm now closer to this spawn location, a Grimm now spawns over by the rocks on the opposite side of the map to the exit. The 2 creeps that I wanted to spawn in to the side of me, nearer to the exit, now only has 1, whilst my new positioning manipulated a Grimm to spawn too far away. Now I have to go deal with that one before coming back to the other, and then heading towards the exit, rather than just taking the last 2 creeps out at once before heading on my merry way. Do you see now how the micro RNG of spawning time completely snowballed the effect of losing time from one thing into another? You could say, well, you only lost a few seconds, but this is the thing about speedrunning. Time is saved in little increments, not in one big slab all at once. You may get huge time saves when you first start running because you're constantly improving, and saving like 2 minutes in a single chapter can be a thing you accomplish. But as you get more inclined with the game you're running, you're going to optimise more and more. When you perform the same thing hundreds or thousands of times, the execution gets so precise that to suddenly save 3 seconds over what you had done previously is utterly immense. When we start adding up all the little things in each chapter, you may find that at the end you lost like 45 seconds overall. But because this isn't done in one big slab that you can very obviously notice, like as if you just stood still for 45 seconds and then played the rest perfectly, for example, it can be hard to notice. It's all these little increments that are going to add up, which is what's going to save you the time. So when you see yourself fail a bunny hop, for example, that's going to cost you time. When you think, oh, I could have engaged here faster on these Grimm, that's going to cost you time. It's all these little bits adding up that are going to total you losing multiple seconds within a certain run. Now, whilst RNG is prevalent throughout the game, the first 2 chapters are completely set in stone with what waves and encounters you get, and they will be the same each and every time. The only exception would be in chapter 2, just before the control centre fight, if you get the right path. You can either get 4 Beos and an alpha Beowolf, or you can get 4 Beowolves, 4 creeps, and then an alpha Beowolf, which is obviously going to be slower than the first one. However, since the rest is consistent, you can get a consistent way of fighting through the mission each and every time. Because chapter 1 and 2 are consistent with what happens in them, I'm actually going to show you briefly me running through chapter 1 until I get to the control centre fight, or just a bit before there, and explain my thought processes behind what I'm doing as I go. Afterwards, I'll show you a chapter where fights aren't consistent and wave encounter RNG starts to become a thing, and then I can show you my thought processes to adapt to those types of situations. Hopefully this will give you an idea of how you should be thinking if you want to start lowering your times in your runs. Okay, so first off, let's start with chapter 1. As previously said, I'm going to go in and triple light heavy the 2 creeps at the start in a certain position so that I'm in the right spot ready for the next spawn-ins once they're taken out. You'll often find that one of those first 2 creeps will like to dig towards you, so you actually have to hold on to the heavy portion of your attack until it's resurfaced, otherwise you won't land the kill. Once they were taken out, however, all I have to do now is turn around to be facing the spot where the 3 more are going to spawn in based on my position when I took out the first 2 creeps. If RNG is kind, they'll all spawn in around the same time, and I'll take them out with the heavy portion of my triple light heavy. Now, because of my position where they were taken out, I can turn to my left and start heading towards the spawn point where one of the creeps are going to spawn in towards the exit. I do this knowing that the other spawn location for the second and final creep of this section will spawn in behind it, so once I reach that position I can charge up my triple light heavy to take them both out. Next is just me dash B hopping for optimal speed down the pathway to the next zone, whilst tucking into the left as that's where I'll need to be for the next section. Rather than jump through the gap, I actually veer to the left here and jump over the little pedestal so that the creeps in this next section spawn in a little bit quicker. I then head to their location knowing that 3 are going to spawn in here. I'm going to triple light heavy them down, but if the third creep is delayed, I'll space out my light attacks to buy me time, or even add a dodge in there to buy me even more time if it's really being stubborn, so that I can take them all out at once. I then move over to the other creep by the rocks and double light heavy it down. Once I do, I move to the left of the rocks slightly as I charge a triple light heavy ready to hit 2 more creeps that are going to spawn in by the rock. But as I do, I then move round to the right side of the rock. Why? Well, it was to manipulate a creep to spawn in to the left of me further up ahead. The reason being is that there are only 4 spawn locations close to the exit in this section, and I know that there's another 5 enemies that still need to spawn in, those being 4 creeps and the alpha creep at the end. If I didn't do that manipulation by moving to the left of the rock and instead just went to the right straight away and started heading down there and ate up those 4 spawn locations, the alpha creep would have to spawn behind me once I took out those 4 creeps, and I would have to waste time both heading towards it and then back on myself, which is just going to cost you time. When the alpha creep spawns in, I wait a second before engaging, since I plan to kill it with a triple light heavy, countered into an uncharged heavy to kill it, and if I engage too early, it will have the damage reduction from its spawn in animation, and the combo will not kill it. As I wait though, I prepare to angle it in a particular direction so that an uncharged heavy will connect. If you're not too sure, you can just use the tree stump that was next to it to make it that it hits its back when you triple light heavy, so it doesn't get knocked back too far, and then you can use your uncharged heavy. I then dash B hop to the next area, adding a few ledge pulls on the side as I head towards that direction down the slope. On this Beowolf, I choose to just ult it down. I then move in a way to make the next 4 Beowolves spawn in at certain locations, so that when I ult those down also, the last 4 creeps of this section are going to spawn in at the 4 locations closer towards the exit. I was able to use an ultimate on that singular Beowolf because I'm going to be triple light heavying creeps for the next 2 waves basically in the cave fight coming up, so it's going to refill my ult gauge for me. So that ultimate was just laying around spare, and it would just kill that singular Beowolf faster than any other method. After that is me just basically dash B hopping towards the cave, and so long as you get there before Port finishes his first dialogue, you're totally golden, since the fight won't start until he finishes every word from his second set of dialogue. So even if you theoretically got there within his first word from his first set of dialogue, and you were stood right by the control centre, you would still have to listen to that whole first set of dialogue, and then his second dialogue until the very last word until the fight commences, so it actually doesn't save you any time.
Let's get 'em. Yeah, we win!
Nice work, students! As you know, we've been having some trouble with the security network in this area. We need boots on the ground to investigate. That means you, team. Onward!
I wonder if Dr. Zubak knows about this place.
Ah, yes, the Emerald Forest is filled with the ruins of ancient kingdoms. Keep an eye out for artifacts. Dr. Utlik is always looking to expand Beacon's collection.
Now let's take a look at a situation where wave encounter RNG starts to become a thing. As well as spawn locations, it would be handy to know which groups of Grimm are possible to spawn in around the area you're currently at, since again, there are set groups of Grimm spawns that you'll get, but they'll be given to you randomly. When you go into fights that are wave spawns, like waves 1 through 4 for example, it'll show you a number of how many Grimm you'll need to yet kill. This number can also be a good indicator for which wave RNG you're getting. When it comes to how you want to tackle a fight, knowledge is power. If you already know what you're going up against before it even happens, or you find out as you see the first Grimm spawn in, you can plan your strategy accordingly to suit the moment with what you want to do. Let's look at an example of this. So this is the section in chapter 5 just after I headed through the right hand side door at the start of the level. Here I know that 3 different waves can occur, those being an Ursa, 3 creeps and 4 Beowolves, or 4 Beowolves and then 4 more Beowolves, or 4 Beowolves with an Ursa and then an Ursa at the end. In this case I got 4 Beowolves with an Ursa with the Ursa at the end, since if I got the other wave with an Ursa in it, the Ursa would have spawned in first before the creeps did, so I know for a fact this is the wave that I'm going to be getting. With this in mind, my goal is to then position in a way that I can spam triple light heavies at the Ursa and Beowolves at the same time. I engage with an aerial heavy counter-cancelled into a triple light heavy on the first Beowolf, like we learned in the kill strategy section, then proceed to spam triple light heavies at all the enemies once they're grouped up. The enemies in this particular region I know can spawn in spaced out pretty far, so moving in to try and ult the Beowolves down isn't going to be something I can do in a hurry, so I continue to spam triple light heavies at the group. As I'm doing this, I'm basically also looking to see if at any point the Ursa is going to use its rock attack, so I can just go in and quick charged heavy it to set up a team attack stun. But it doesn't, so my plan is to now use an ultimate on it. With this in mind, I can ignore spamming triple light heavies now, as simply jumping in to use an ult on the Ursa will also take out the remaining Beowolves anyway. After my ultimate, it then does go to use a rock attack, so I dodge out of the way and go to use a quick charged heavy. It may also be hard to notice, but I actually added a little pause after using my dodge before charging up my quick charged heavy, since if you do the buttons too close together, RWBY will just simply use her dash heavy attack. After it's stunned, I know that a double light heavy will finish it off pretty easily, though a second quick charged heavy would have been equally as good. After it's downed, I know that a second Ursa is going to spawn in. My goal here now is to finish it off quickly with 2 triple light heavies and 2 ultimates, but if it uses its rock attack on me in the first couple of attacks, I'll opt for using a team attack stun instead. It's worth noting here also about ult management. Using 2 ultimates on this single Ursa is going to leave me with none going into the tree fight coming up next. At the tree fight, I know that the first encounter I'm going to get is either going to start with Beowolves or another Ursa. More than likely it's going to be Beowolves, in which case using 2 ultimates on the Ursa here actually wasn't too bad, since the spawning locations are pretty spread out around the tree, so you're probably better off just triple light heavying down the Beowolves rather than trying to group them up for an ultimate anyway. But if you get an Ursa spawn in first, you're now going into that fight without any ults left, so you basically just have to hope that it uses its rock attack so you can team attack stun it and then take it out quickly. However, sometimes Ursas can be stubborn and just keep using their claw attack. And if that's the case, then you're just going to lose a chunk of time just spamming triple light heavies at it. On the flip side, the Ursa that I used the 2 ultimates on here could have also been stubborn and kept using claw attacks, in which case using 2 ultimates on it is a justified gamble just to try and finish it off quickly and hope that you don't get an Ursa spawn in at the tree fight ahead, since it usually feels like Beowolves are spawning in more commonly. So you go for the risk with the hopes of it working out. Here, it didn't really give me an opportune moment for me to wait for it to use its rock attack, since I was already committed to my fast kill strategy, and spamming triple light heavies at it whilst hoping it does its rock attack is just going to cost time in a run. So I chose to just use my 2 ults and hope I don't get an Ursa in the encounter ahead, as I said. With all of this in mind, you should now have a better understanding about the mindset and thoughts you should be having when speedrunning Grimm Eclipse. Now you have an idea of how speedrunning is generally performed, I'd urge you to now go watch some runs with either me or people playing as RWBY and see how they perform with it. Having said this, I actually would recommend that you do not watch my older RWBY runs from like 2022, as the strats and patterns I used in that are now very outdated, and I feel like I've improved a lot as a player since then, so I feel like it would be pretty counterproductive to watch. My any percent RWBY run is okay, but it only really includes the last fights of a level since most other things are just skipped over, so it's not exactly the best resource for learning noskips. It's pretty likely that at some stage I'll be doing an updated no-skip run with RWBY when I have the time and motivation, so it would then be another source you could study from. But meanwhile, don't forget that there are still other people who play the game extremely well, and each person has their own thing they bring to the table with their playstyle and strategies, so studying from them is also going to help further your gameplay too. If you would like a couple of recommendations, I would suggest watching the 53-minute run done by FeldXD, since his patterns for each fight and general gameplay are just extremely good. Or you can check out Alterna ZX's run, which is just a great showcase of a high skill cap when playing as RWBY. I'll put a link to both of these runs that I mentioned down in the description box below. If you have any questions regarding playing RWBY or the game in general, feel free to leave a comment down below, or we also have a dedicated Discord for speedrunning Grimm Eclipse that I'll link down below, where you're more than welcome to ask anything you wish, and either I or someone else will get back to you. There are plenty of knowledgeable people in that server, and they're all equally capable and happy with helping you out. And with that, we have concluded the Advanced RWBY Rose Guide for Grimm Eclipse. I hope that I've been able to convey just how intricate and fun this seemingly basic game can be, and I hope that this guide has inspired at least one person to pick the game up. Again, my name is Kinru, and thank you for watching. Take care.